Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Team House. I'm Dave Park. Jack can't be here tonight. Welcome our many-time guest, Marc Polymeropoulos. Marc is a retired CIA SIS, correct? A big shot with a vast knowledge of international affairs with the intelligence community, and particularly on the topic we're going to talk about tonight, which will cover the situation in Israel. We'll also talk about Ukraine. Welcome, Marc. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Great to be here. I think this is number 5.
I believe
this time
so.
I've been on. I don't know what the record is, but I'm a little insulted Jack is not here again. I think he's avoiding me, so we're gonna have to address this somehow. I can't come to the Christmas party.
He's
so I'll
playing
be on
hard
vacation.
to get.
Maybe that's it.
Oh yeah. Well, he's playing hard to get. He's like,
yeah, I know.
That if he's not here, maybe you'll come to the Christmas party.
Okay. Touche. Let's go.
We want to give a quick shout out to our first sponsor of the evening, barbellapparel.com. Barbell Apparel makes amazing clothes, guys. These jeans are Barbell Apparel. They stretch. My ass has never looked better. I mean, you will love their clothes. Check them out, barbellapparel.com.
Stand up again. Hold on.
Turn around.
Spin. Do a spin for us. I mean, that's a great looking ass.
Yeah. I think that I was walking down the street and somebody called me a thought.
There you go.
So
the +1, yeah.
So the jeans
That's
are definitely working. So check out Barbell Apparel. Great clothes. Honestly, I'll never wear another pair of jeans. I mean, I'll wear other pairs of jeans, but they'll always be Barbell Apparel. I love them to death. Anyway, Marc, let's kind of get into it. Barbellapparel.com/teamhouse. Get a free stealth hoodie with any purchase over $99. So, Marc, back to you, the star of the show. For people who may, be new to the show or haven't seen you before, can you give us the brief intro into your background?
Sure, of course. I worked for 26 years at CIA. Started off in 1993. The first 2 desks I was sitting on was the Afghan desk, and then went and did some stuff on the Palestinians, and then went to CTC on the Hamas desk. So talk about stuff that's relevant. I mean, nothing frickin' changes. It's unbelievable. Same players, but we can talk about that a little later. I served 26 years. Did 7 tours overseas, most of the time in the Middle East. Lots of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then the last 2 years of my career, after I unfortunately got promoted, you were very kind. Certainly was not a bigwig. I just think hung around a lot. So if you hang around there, you're going to get promoted to the kind of general officer cadre. But I was the deputy and the acting operations chief over what's called the Europe and Eurasia Mission Center. So that really had to do with Russia, Ukraine, places what we thought was kind of calm and quiet. Not really, but really it was an amazing, it was a unique career. I kind of look back and I think about all the highs and lows. I'm very humble. I'm really proud of a lot of the stuff we did. And then some terrible things happened too when we lost friends in the line of duty. And so you kind of sit back and you come on great shows like this. That's why I love coming on here. Someone asked me, why do you love coming on the Team House? All they do is kind of drink and hang out and chat. And I'm like, that's what I fucking do all the time. That's my life now. I mean, I usually do it at a dive bar in Northern Virginia called the Vienna Inn. But I love this show, and because you guys are my peeps, and so it's a very, very comfortable place. But it's awesome to be on again. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Do you want to? I don't know if you want to start with with Hamas and the Israel-Hamas question, or if you want to start with any updates on Russia-Ukraine, because that's really fallen off in the news since since October 7th. So, do you have a preference?
Yeah, let's do Israel. Stuff first.
Okay.
Just because it's fresh in my mind. I think some of the listeners will be interested because I had the opportunity, I'll talk about it in a sec, to go to the Israeli embassy the other day and view the raw footage of October 7th, which was fucking horrendous. But they allowed me to take notes. They're allowing members of the media, and somehow I've qualified as that. I kind of talked my way in. And I took a couple pages of notes, and they're gruesome. And so I'll share that. But first, I just have to say hi to D, producer, because a fellow ethnically ethnic Greek. I'm having some ouzo. Here you go, D. That's for you.
Thank you, Marc. I appreciate the respect.
We got the Greek mafia, of course, runs the CIA. Everybody knows that.
I've been saying it. Nobody wants to believe me.
Well, it's true.
Well, we went to a family restaurant, one of Dee's family restaurants last night, and I'm pretty sure that there were some cagey individuals hanging out in the shadows.
Yeah, a couple people on parole for sure.
Well, then they'd fit right in the intelligence community. No, so the Israel Hamas war, it was fascinating. Let me just kind of go. I'll start from October 7th. And so, I think, Dave and Dee, you certainly know I'm a contributor for MSNBC. That's one of my kind of post-retirement gigs. And I'm on TV a lot. And so, they use me as their national security analyst because of my background in the intelligence community. And I think they also like having someone who's very much in the center, because I don't always kind of toe the line of a lot of what is said on air there. And that's good. You want to have, just like, you need some folks in the center on Fox, you need some folks in the center on MSNBC. But I got a call. I woke up. I was in Harrisonburg, Virginia. It was October 7th at 7 a.m. and I had 55 text messages. And it was MSNBC saying, you got to get on the air in 5 minutes. Andrea Mitchell's waiting. And I was like, why? They said, literally, the text was, a Hamas army just invaded Israel. And I looked over at my wife, and I said, I think I get on TV now. Like, I got to get my computer up. And she said, what happened? I told her, and I said, did we drink too much last night? Like, was there too much wine that we had? Because that's insane. It wasn't Hamas and Israel were going at it again. It was literally a Hamas army had invaded. And as you kind of unpack it, it was relatively true. It was a 3,000 man army, complete with Hamas's kind of shock troops, their special operations capabilities, and over kind of 20 different locations in Israel, launched this surprise attack, which ended up killing 1,200 Israelis, and certainly changed the region in the near and medium term, and then of course became a huge problem for the United States government. But just in terms of kind of the shock, I immediately thought back to, well, that was one of the first operational desks at CTC in 1996, where there was a Hamas desk, and guess what? It's not there anymore. And so then you start thinking about, how did this happen? And it was pretty clear. I take no credit for this. I said it on air at 7 o'clock in the morning on October 7th, but I said, hey, this is Israel's 9/11. And it certainly, when everyone, this is not really an original thought. But ultimately, this was this, kind of incredible intelligence failure in which the vaunted, Shin Bet, the Israeli internal service, Israeli military intelligence, Mossad is externally focused. So they're looking up at Lebanon, they're looking at Iran. This is not on Mossad, but Shin Bet and IDI, what happened? And it turns out they focus so much on kind of, signals intelligence, intercepts, or ELINT, electronics intelligence sensors, or, they built this huge wall that even went underground. They had drones in the air, but they missed the human intelligence piece. They didn't have a human source, which is incredible. That could tell them that 3,000 man army was about to invade. And it's one of there'll be a bloodletting on this. There'll be an official inquiry in Israel. There always is. They did it after the 1973 kind of Yom Kippur War, where they were surprised. It'll happen again. But for a country which has this vaunted intelligence capability, that was a shock.
So, I've read, and I think one of the challenging things right now is, especially with social media, is parsing out what is misinformation, and not just misinformation from people who are on, Israeli misinformation or Hamas misinformation, but, people saying something, like a Hamas operative saying something as an Israeli, and then being able to debunk that and say, oh, look, it was debunked. You know what I mean? Sort of that putting false stuff out there. Like, it's very hard to tell. But I read a couple reports that said that a lot of, there was reporting that was going up, but some mid-level officers were like, that's fanciful. Right. I'm not going to report on it.
So what it turns out what happened, again, this is my opinion based, I think it's based on good sources. I have a lot of friends, who are former Israeli military, former Israeli intelligence, former members of the Israeli diplomatic corps. So I do reach back into Israel. What I don't do, by the way, is talk to my old friends at the agency. I've been really, really kind of true to that. I don't want to call back in. I don't want to ever get crossed up with someone accidentally giving me classified information. But I have enough of a kind of a knowledge base in this. And I'll just throw, 'cause one thing I forgot to mention, I worked with the Israeli intelligence service very closely, the Palestinian service. I've been to their headquarters in Ramallah. I've been to every city in the West Bank. I work with the Jordanians and the Egyptians. And so I really have a good sense of kind of the region. But Dave, you bring up a great point about, so some of these reports are true in the sense that, so first of all, Israel had the war plan. There was a 40-page plan that they, presumably it's with signals intelligence. The last one they obtained was about a year old, but it was the plan. But again, what they didn't have was a human source to give it context, because as this plan then filtered up through the Israeli analytics, side of the house, it was dismissed. It was too fanciful. It was aspirational. And again, the inquiry is going to be just brutal, because there's going to be people named who are going to have said some things which turned out to be kind of catastrophically wrong. Because if you think about it, the attack occurred on a holiday. It was also a time in which the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, had redeployed a lot of their Gaza units to the West Bank because the settlers were causing all sorts of trouble there. And so they really were kind of left naked. But ultimately, there was warnings, not specific ones. I mean, it's going to be more than the famous presidential daily brief that said, Al Qaeda wants to attack the homeland, with no details. In this case, Israel had the details; they didn't have the timing. But ultimately, but let me just say one thing about accountability. The Israelis do accountability way better than we do. So Ronen Bar is the head of Shin Bet. He already came out and said, "This is on me." He will resign when this war is over. Same thing with the head of military intelligence, said the same thing. This is, I take full responsibility. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not done any of that, and that's a whole kind of separate issue. But the Israeli, security establishment is gonna have a lot of explaining to do. And the one piece on that I'll say is, having been involved and made some decisions that were wrong in my career, that led to really bad things happening. There's no one who's going to feel worse than the leadership in these intelligence services. And one of the things I've been talking a lot about is that the Israelis are going to have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get back at it and lean into it. There's no other choice. The country's at war, and I think they have. And I think and we can speak maybe later, that I think they've performed very well. But there's no one who's going to kind of look back, in their retirement with more regret than these individuals who kind of stood watch at an intelligence failure, which is one for the ages. And I think it's going to be the inquiry is going to be pretty nasty, and the Israelis do this very, very well. There will be accountability. Yeah.
You mentioned, a 3,000 man element of Hamas with, different units and their sort of shock troops. We saw at the Nova Festival. We saw how they paraglided in. Where did Hamas? Where did they get the training? Where did they get the parachutes? Where did they get all this military grade equipment?
Well, you're looking at an issue that we still don't know how to kind of wrap our hands around. Is that certainly the Iranians have funded and helped train Hamas for years. There is a question now in the intelligence community, and I'm a little skeptical of this, because I think they've bent over backwards to say that the Iranians were not aware of the exact plans. And of course, the administration is saying this, as are the Israelis, because ultimately, if Iran was culpable, that means they have to be dealt with immediately. But I think that clearly, so much of the training, the funding, the weapons, the equipment comes from Iran. One of the things, though, is as you look back, is that they were even conducting some of this training in Gaza. The paraglider, when with the issue of the paragliders at the rave, and there's been a lot on social media, you see them coming in. That actually is not new. An old Palestinian terrorist group called the PFLP-GC, or I think maybe it was the PFLP. It was kind of two secular kind of Marxist terrorist groups, if you can imagine. They had some spectacular kind of hang glider attacks in the past as well. So it's a technique that is not new, but it was pretty wild to see that. But to train a 3,000 person army, it probably took place. My guess would be both in Gaza, but also in Lebanon. And I think that the Israelis almost certainly have a exquisite, idea of what happened. They've captured a great many Hamas operatives, and so obviously they're doing these debriefs, And so I think they have a pretty good idea of exactly what happened. That will come out in the future. But it just goes to show that the Iran issue, which we've never been able to tackle, our government, the Israeli government, the notion that we can have some kind of nuclear deal now, I think, is in the toilet, because of certainly Iranian backing for this. Is in essence a mass murder and now a regional war. And of course, and Dave, you and I talked about it kind of offline, the Iranians are also busy attacking via their proxies U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. The Iranians, via the Houthis, their surrogate in Yemen, have essentially shut down, kind of a major international, waterway. And so, I think the U.S. has this fear of escalation, but we still haven't figured out what to do about Iran. I will say I can't imagine us going back to any kind of negotiations with the Iranians now. And this is in everyone's back, certainly in the back of the Israelis' mind, but in U.S. policymaker circles too, is how do we deal with in Iran that we thought we could have a new nuclear deal with, but that ain't happening.
With you see a lot more than I do, and you were behind the scenes for a long time. The leadership in Iran hasn't changed for decades. Why did we think that Iran was any more willing to play ball than they were 10 or 20 years ago?
I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking on the part of successive U.S. administrations, but I think one thing that was inspiring to a lot of people, obviously there's a difference between the Iranian government, which kind of supports terrorist groups around the world, really is a thorn in the side of the United States. But then there's the Iranian people, and we saw for months, if not, a year plus of these incredible demonstrations on the streets that the Iranians wanted more. They certainly wanted to be free of this kind of terrible, autocratic rule with, religious zeal. And so I think we may have been fooled by that, while the Iranian people have, do want freedom, and I don't think they hate the United States at all. But the Iranian government hasn't changed. And, the notion that, somehow we could kind of deal with them as a partner that we could maybe trust but verify. I think that's certainly out the door now. But we'll see. The other thing, it depends on the next U.S. administration. Clearly, the Democrats are much more willing to entertain. We're not getting into politics, I promise. But the Democrats, just in general, are more willing to entertain negotiations with the Iranians than the Republicans. And so I think the next election, matters a lot.
Yeah. Now, can you give us sort of, because you worked in Israel, you've worked with the Palestinian intelligence. Can you give us sort of the situation in terms of you had Arafat, you had the PLO, you have the PLA, Hamas. What took over in 2007? Is that right? They were elected.
Elections in 2006 in Gaza.
Yeah. So can you kind of give us the background of Hamas? I mean, because the PLO isn't really. I mean, once Arafat was gone, didn't the PLO kind of?
It's the successor is the Palestinian Authority now,
right?
In essence, right. And so, I mean, 2006 was kind of this seminal moment. Again, a mistake, I think, on the United States' part, where we certainly advocated for elections in Gaza, and Hamas won. And it's what a lot of these Islamic fundamentalist groups do. It's one vote, one time. Thank you very much. There's no democracy, and there's never been an election since then. So Hamas controls Gaza. In the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority with kind of nominal control. That was to be kind of the representative of the Palestinian people, but it ended up being a very old and corrupt organization, really hated by the Palestinians. And then the Israelis didn't make matters any better, because over the last couple of years, there's been an explosion of settlements. Mm-hmm. And so, the Israeli settlers, I think, have doubled in size. And so there's huge tensions there. But in essence, this goes back to, what is going to happen between the two sides. And for a long time, the United States, and sometimes with an Israeli partner, pushed the idea of a two-state solution, meaning that the Palestinians would have some form of their own state, the Palestinian Authority as that representative. But then Prime Minister Netanyahu is fundamentally against that, and what he did, which is one of the most cynical moves that has come back, and I think that's why his popularity is essentially at zero now, is he actively promoted a policy of strengthening Hamas in Gaza, and Hamas as an Islamic terrorist group, dedicated to the destruction of Israel. But he did so in order to discredit the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, to ensure there was never any unity between the two entities, the West Bank and Gaza. And Netanyahu openly talked about this. This was the policy. And he thought as did some in the Israeli security establishment, that they could deal with Hamas. And Hamas pulled one of the great intelligence tricks of all time. First of all, the Israelis let in 19,000 Palestinian workers from Gaza into Israel. Well, it turns out a lot of them were actually spying. They were casing for this attack. But it was the notion that Israel would kind of ease some of the economic burdens. And then comes this deal with the Qataris, who were pumping in hundreds of millions of dollars into Gaza. Again, at the request and the agreement of not only Israelis, the United States knew all about this as well, but ultimately, which is kind of keep the peace. They thought they could, in some way, appease Hamas, and the Hamas leadership absolutely tricked the Israelis. Meanwhile, an operation of this size, Dave, 3,000-man army, training that took, months, if not a year plus. I mean, this thing has been planned for a year plus. And so, the feeling of betrayal on the part of the Israelis, now it sounds a little ridiculous because Hamas is a terrorist group, but boy, did Hamas pull a fast one over Israel. And it turns out they had been planning this for extraordinary amount of time. Again, under the guise of, hey, there's going to be kind of this semi-peace between the two sides. It certainly wasn't that way at all.
Now, you mentioned that Netanyahu was attempting to strengthen Hamas in order to create that divide. With the U.S. and Qatar, was that money, like all the money that's gone to Palestine, the $100 million? Obviously, that gets funneled off by Hamas, and it keeps. But was it intended for Palestinian development, or was
100%.
Or was it for appeasement?
No. It was intended to help Gaza operate as an entity. So it's it's good governance, it's hospitals, it's schools, it's infrastructure, and Hamas stole most of it. There's a lot of really good reporting on the tunnel system, this 300 kilometers or whatever it is. I think the Israelis will tell us at the end of the day, but this massive tunnel system underneath Gaza. Well, that was kind of funded by all this, and so they skimmed so much off, and there's 2.2 million people and Palestinians in Gaza living in some pretty bad conditions. This is even pre-war. Yet Hamas is a entity with hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, that's one of the things that you kind of scratch your head at. Some of the Hamas leadership living in 5-star hotels in Qatar,
right?
Flying around on private jets. But again, this was a policy that was okayed by certainly approved by or supported by the Israelis. Qatar was the intermediary, but the U.S. was fine with this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's worth talking a little bit about the U.S. role, and you have to, if you kind of look at just like where you can criticize what happened in Afghanistan and the withdrawal. For a long time, under the Abraham Accords, which was this kind of peace treaty, or I wouldn't even say it peace, but normalization between Israel and several Gulf Arab states, it was done with the specific intention of leaving the Palestinians out, never solving the Palestinian issue. And the U.S. was fine with this, and so ultimately that didn't help either, because obviously the frustrations of the Palestinians are growing, and then when it comes to just this appeasement of Hamas, the U.S. is right there. I mean, Qatar is a huge ally. There's a massive U.S. airbase there, but Qatar also plays this kind of strange role of middleman with awful groups such as the Taliban. And Hamas. And I think that, there should be some kind of policy discussion now afterwards. I mean, one of the things, and maybe it's a good time to talk about it now. I was on Morning Joe on MSNBC this morning because I wrote a piece in the Messenger, basically saying, over 30 Americans died on October 7th. Where's the outrage? Right. So 32 Americans are dead. And, so this is not a war just in Israel. There's also 8 Americans held hostage. And sometimes there's this notion so these were dual citizens. Well, that's kind of bullshit, because so many. I actually did some research. I looked into this. Is one guy's name, Arya Ziering, an Israeli kid. He was serving the IDF, but he also spent every summer in Maine. I was a big Red Sox fan. He just was here, ran the San Francisco Marathon. He has a blue passport. These are American citizens who are dead. And Dave, you know this from serving in the U.S. government. If you have that big, beautiful blue passport and something happens to you, like, we're coming to the rescue.
That's the agreement with the government, right? That's the 100%. Tacit agreement that your government is going to help you
And so whether that's the FBI trying to bring Hamas members to justice, which will never happen, or the U.S. military working with the Israelis to put, a lot of lead on foreheads in Gaza, or the intelligence community using our own unique authorities to remove people from the battlefield. This is a really big deal. There are more Americans killed on October 7th than the embassy bombings in Dar es Salaam in Nairobi in 1998 by Al-Qaeda. And so why isn't anyone pissed off?
Right.
I mean, I think it comes back to just this notion of kind of this, undercurrent of anti-Semitism. I mean, somehow, and these Israelis who are dual citizens, guess what? They speak American like if you're from, I don't know, Baltimore or Philadelphia or Chicago. So, you remember this, that's our mantra.
Yeah.
And if something happens, we are going to, when I say avenge them, that's the wrong word, but we're going to bring those perpetrators to justice legally or remove them from the battlefield. And I can't, I would imagine the Counterterrorism Center is hard at work on this, helping the Israelis. I'm sure, Mossad and Shin Bet and IDI have that. I think back to, I put it in the messenger piece. I think back to there was a poster that was made right after 9/11. And it hung in CTC for a while, and it said, "Every day is September 12th." And I fucking love that. If you don't have a step, in your walk coming in every day, or a whatever, skip in your step, I don't know what I'm saying, but if you're not pumped walking in with that, and so for the Israelis it would be same type of thing. Every day is October 8th, and so there's work to do, and I think that clearly the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence services are working very well together. They always have. It's a very close ally. I've worked with them very closely. They have a different view of collateral damage than we do, and that was always the case. I remember. So I'll tell you a quick story. Sorry, I'm rambling here. Two things. One is a good buddy of mine. He's listening now. We had served together in the Middle East, and I called him right after this. And he had served in Israel, worked with the Israelis, also worked with the Palestinians in the past. And he said, what's going to happen, Marc? They're going to go in and kill everybody. And then I remember listening to Zohar Palti, who was the former chief of counterterrorism for Mossad. He was on a podcast, the Washington Institute. And he said, and I remember Zohar, and I worked with him, and he said, we are not going to be nice. So their view of how they have to kind of reconstitute that aura of fear and invincibility is going to cause them to do some things that maybe we're uncomfortable with. But you know what? Nobody should be surprised. Like, that big embrace that President Biden gave to the Israelis when he did that. And I said, oh, shit, we're owning this. And they're going to go fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember having conversations with the Israelis about collateral. And they would look at me like I had a giant, something growing out of my forehead.
Right.
And they just don't think that way. And you got to understand that. That's the partner we have. So I'm not surprised at kind of the level of lethality that they have unleashed.
Yeah. Real quick, I need to give a shout out to our second sponsor for the night, and then we have a lot to cover. Thank you to HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Say hello to a stress-less holiday season with the help of HelloFresh. Skip the grocery store and save time. Look, HelloFresh is a great solution. If you cook, if you don't cook, HelloFresh is a great way to learn how to cook. I love HelloFresh because I enjoy cooking, and it sends me the portions I need. I don't have to go to the store for them. It gives me recipe ideas that I never thought of. When you order a HelloFresh meal kit, you get the recipe, you get all the ingredients you need, and it's just up to you to cook them. So check out HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/teamhousefree. That's HelloFresh.com/teamhousefree, and use code teamhousefree for free breakfast for life. One breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/teamhousefree with code teamhousefree. So going back to this, because, that is, one of the things we talked about off the air is there is collateral damage going on, but at the same time, they are trying to evacuate people. They're trying to use the knockers to let people know that they're going to bomb an area. Where is Israel falling on that balance? Because it's one of those things that's getting confused in the media, I think.
I think that, so this is a great point of discussion. And I just want to preface that, and we'll get to that in 1 second. But, after my comments over the last half hour, some people might say, well, here goes Marc. He's kind of this, crazy pro-Israel guy who just wants the Israelis to kill everybody. But that's actually not true. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the Palestinian areas. I spent every city in the West Bank. I was traveling through there back in 1996 for several months. I've been to Gaza back in 96 as well. And I have enormous sympathy for the Palestinians. I actually, am one of those kind of proponents of a two-state solution. I think the Palestinians should have their state, and they have been victims of obviously being under kind of Hamas rule. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. And that last point, if you really want to analyze this conflict now, you have to look at the civilian damage that's happened. I mean, it is a catastrophe, that has occurred. And so while I certainly sympathize with the Israelis, and I'll go over in a sec, about the video that I saw on October 7th, you can't not look at what's happening inside Gaza as well. If you're not human, if you don't. And so when it comes, I think there's two bins in terms of these U.S.-Israeli dynamic now. And the first bin is kind of in the near term, and that's we need the Israelis to do a little bit better on targeting. There was an article in the paper today about the use of dumb bombs, and I think that's right. A lot of people don't have any idea what they're talking about here. But ultimately, kind of this, which is more kind of heavy-handed airstrikes, which is killing a lot of innocent civilians. So we're telling them, hey, change your tactics a little bit, and they're listening in some sense. I think they are, and also it's the notion of letting humanitarian aid in, which they're doing as well. And so this is all designed for the U.S. to give Israel some more, diplomatic runway to keep going.
Right.
I think we want them to kind of wind down this kind of heavy-handed campaign. I think it's actually going to organically happen for a couple of reasons. One is Israel's made a lot of progress, up in the north and now moving to the south. I don't think they're going to need that kind of heavy-handed tactics. But the other part of it too, Dave, I think a lot of people don't understand is that, Israel can't go on and doing, with 300,000 forces mobilized, the economy is going to fall apart.
Right.
And they've never, the mobilization right now is extended, 2 months. And so I think they're going to go to much more targeted strikes, use of special operations forces, use of, drones and more surgical capability. And I think that'll naturally happen. But clearly the U.S. has put some pressure because of the collateral, because it's awful. And again, I mean, I've certainly tilted towards Israel in my commentary. I think as a former counterterrorism official, it's almost impossible not to after what occurred on October 7th. But if we can somehow get if we can somehow make some magic out of this at the end of the day, with some kind of settlement in which the Palestinian Authority is replaced or strengthened or changed in some fashion, and that there's a move to a two-state solution. I don't think the Israelis are ready for that now. Even the most leftist Israeli friends I have are like, it's too soon. We got you, but too soon. But we got to get to that just because, I've spent a lot of time. The Palestinians are wonderful people. They don't deserve this. And the last point, Dave, and I think that this, based on your background too in conflict zones, is everyone thinks war is a fucking video game.
Right.
There was 10,000 civilians that were killed in Mosul in 2017.
Right.
And no one gave a shit back then either.
Right.
And so and I know from being in Iraq and Afghanistan that and I'm proud of my service there. We killed a lot of civilians. Mm-hmm. We just did. And that's and so when it comes to conflict, when it comes to war, these things happen. You certainly try to minimize it. I'm not excusing anything, but bad shit happens. Like if you don't want bad shit to happen, don't go to war.
Right.
Because bad stuff will happen, and your people are going to do some bad things too.
Right.
That's just the nature of conflict. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think about this a lot.
I mean, I am of the mind, like I agree with you that that yes, Israel needs to do the best they can to protect the civilian populace, but at the same time, we are not seeing protests on the 110 or the I-10 or whatever in California or on the Brooklyn Bridge for the victims in Sudan in this conflict. Like people are very specific about which civilian deaths they're protesting right now.
Dave, someone told me the other day that I don't know if this 500,000 people in Sudan have died in the last several months. Is that true?
I don't know what the numbers are.
It was a staggering number. Or maybe it was something else too. Is that several 100,000 Ukrainian kids have been kidnapped and taken to Russia. Like there's terrible barbarism and depravity all over the world. It is interesting that selectively that the Israelis are picked on. And again, I think it goes back to that issue of anti-Semitism. I'm sorry because why college kids are protesting this against all the other kind of ills of the world.
Right.
You certainly can question that, I think.
Well, I mean, and we saw it here in the U.S. As early as October 8th, student groups mobilizing and calling Hamas freedom fighters and revolutionaries. And it's like, you did not watch the footage. You did not see the footage. When people are joyful about beheading, when they are joyful about killing civilians, there's no freedom in that.
Right. So this is a good time for me. I'm going to get my glasses on because I'm getting old.
Yeah.
So on 3 days ago, I went to the Israeli embassy for this kind of exclusive screening of the footage, and they're not putting this out to the general public out of respect for the families. That's how bad this is. So I went there with some other members of the media, some think tanks. Again, I kind of talked my way in there and used my old agency background, and they let me in, and probably I get in trouble because I was saying I was with MSN. I work for MSNBC as a contributor, but anyhow, it was important that I was there, and especially as I told the Israeli press spokes, there's 2 ladies there from the Israeli press shop. I'm like, hey, you got to let me in because I'm going to talk about this on air. Like, Fox and Newsmax, you got those guys or gals. Like, MSNBC crowd, is the one who has to hear this, and they kind of acknowledge, the idea of talking in an echo chamber doesn't make sense. But so they allowed me to take notes, and again, it's a 46-minute video. The footage is from Hamas operatives, the GoPro cameras that the Israelis recovered. It was also from live streaming that Hamas did. It was from Israeli first responders afterwards. It was from Israeli cell phones that were recovered. And it's just this incredible 46 minutes of total, absolute carnage and brutality. And again, I've both been in conflict zones. We've seen a lot of bad stuff. This was extraordinary. So let me just kind of give you a quick snip. I think the listeners will like this in terms of what I saw. Obviously, constant chants by Hamas of Allahu Akbar, that's God is great. In Arabic, that's not that big a deal. But then they start saying, kill the dogs. There was they were referring to the Israelis as dogs the whole time. That's in the Arab world. That's something that is certainly not a positive. I wrote a massacre, bodies piled everywhere. They're executing the injured. Hamas members feel joy. They're screaming, yes, yes, kill, kill, as they mow down civilians. They're shooting cars like it was a video game. Then one of the thoughts I wrote down, Hamas are cowards. They won't fight the IDF this way. They were shooting pets, just executing dogs. That kind of pissed me off. I don't know. It was a little weird. Groans of victims slowly dying. Beating to death on the head civilians with a shovel. Just beating them, bashing their head in. This one was particularly bad. A Hamas terrorist comes in, throws a grenade, kills a father. There's 2 young boys who are in the house in the kibbutz. He's slumped over. He's dead. One of the boys' eyes is blown out. He's screaming, and his brother is trying to comfort him. He's screaming, where's mommy? The Hamas guy sits the 2 kids down, and opens the fridge, and he takes out a bottle of Coke, and he drinks it like a fucking Franco Harris commercial. Remember that old commercials?
Yeah.
For Coke? Yeah. It was just stunning.
Yeah.
Nothing. And then just walks off. Hamas communications that the Israelis kind of put out there, in the internal comms saying that, quote, we cut off their heads. My first kill the Jew. Desecrating bodies, their blood-soaked bodies. The hostages were taken, some of them alive, into Gaza, and they were just beaten along the way, spit on by Palestinians on the street. I mean, this is video. We're watching this. A Hamas member calls his family, and he screams. He's talking to his father. He says, Dad, I killed 10. I killed 10. His father screams back, Allahu Akbar, God is great. Brags to his mom, I killed 10 Jews. The attack on the kibbutz was, the attack on the rave, a mass casualty event.
It's horrible. Yeah.
Bodies stacked up everywhere, and the joy and the celebrating. That's the thing. Just absolutely joyous. And then I think one piece that's worth mentioning, and we've all at the intelligence community we've seen this. There's a dead Israeli soldier, and a Hamas operative comes there and just cuts his head off. He just saws it off in about 10 seconds and picks it up and just parades it around like a trophy. The Hamas members taking selfies. And so kind of the takeaway on this was the joy of Hamas in doing this. But why this matters is because the Israelis know this. And in talking to Israeli officials afterwards, and they say very clearly, we cannot allow Hamas not to be an exhibit, but to have any kind of role next door. In essence, I live in Washington D.C. That's in, right down the road here in Vienna, Northern Virginia.
Right.
That can't happen.
Right.
And so, when we say they want to eradicate Hamas, I mean, nobody really means that. You basically have to degrade Hamas so it's not a threat anymore. But they said that's non-negotiable. So when you hear someone say ceasefire, I mean, for fuck's sake, Bernie Sanders doesn't even support a ceasefire now.
Right.
But when you hear ceasefire or cessation of hostilities, like the UN Secretary General, the Israelis, look at that person, they say, "Are you crazy?"
Right.
And so, all these powerful kind of words that I just read, that what I saw, as an intelligence officer, you always have to put yourself in other people's shoes. So, what do the Palestinians think? Well, what do the Israelis think? And that's what they're thinking. That.
Right.
And then there was a poll that came out 2 days ago by a very reputable pollster in Gaza. In Gaza and the West Bank, in the Palestinian territories, both of them. And 70% of Palestinians approve of October 7th. Now, you can understand that perhaps because of kind of the humanitarian disaster that's unfolded in Gaza. But Israelis point to that poll and say, "What the fuck?
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Our neighbors are an existential threat."
Come on.
Yeah.
And let me just say one other point that I think is missed. There is a big peace camp in Israel, and so many of those Israelis who were killed along the border were actually members of kibbutzes that were letting the Palestinians in, that they wanted them to work on their farms or in the kibbutz. They actually were very much pro-peace, and look what happened.
Yeah. And, in any discussion about, the Hamas warriors, they have the video of them beheading the Thai worker, right? Like, he's not in the Jewish military. Like, why are you beheading a Thai worker? Like,
Right.
There is so much out there that is just vile depravity. If anybody can watch that and say that Hamas is nothing but a death cult.
It was unbelievable. I mean, I was shocked, and I was embarrassed. So I look over with the Israeli press spokes lady, and she has tears in her eyes. I'm like, she's seen this 6 times, and I got I think that what got me the most was the 2 kids screaming for their mom, and the one kid, his eyes gone. But I had tears in my eyes too. I mean, it was. I've seen a lot of bad shit. This was really, really appalling. And again, you walk out of there and you say, okay, I get it. I understand why the Israelis have this sense of resolve now. They ain't stopping until Hamas is again, you can't say eradicated. Nobody says that. We didn't say that about Al-Qaeda. You say degraded to the point it's not a threat anymore. By the way, that's what we did. And so the Israelis are 2 months into this. It took us 10 years to find and kill bin Laden. But, and I'm proud of what we did at the agency, so it's a combination of, empowering our Afghan allies, our surrogate forces, but also kind of relentless drone strikes where we did both, signature strikes, which is killing the foot soldiers, but then, of course, high value target strikes, cutting the head off the snake. And the Israelis get that. They're going to go after their 2 high value targets. It's Yahya Sinwar, is HVT-1, and Mohammed Daif is HVT-2, and they're in Khan Yunis in the south. And then they're going to try to kill as many Hamas members as possible. And their estimate is they've killed about 7,000 of the 30,000. And so, when I talk to my friends in Israel, they think that the IDF thinks they're doing well. Now they understand there's this time constraint, and the U.S. is putting some pressure on them, and there's much more to do. But going back to that video, I mean, I understand the Israeli psyche now. Sure. I really do, because it was the joy. I think that's what was shocking.
Right.
And by the way, this is 3,000 people. It's not one cell of Al Qaeda. I mean, fuck Al Qaeda. When we went and we killed most of them. Right. But it wasn't a cell, one or 2 cells, of people who jumped on a plane and crashed it into the World Trade Center. That's horrible. These are people who kind of up close and personal, and the other thing is the amount of sexual abuse was staggering. Yeah. The systematic use of rape and torture. Again, the video had, you could see, females, with kind of blood soaked in their private areas, or naked with their privates exposed, bound and gagged. The beheadings, the kind of the defiling of victims. I don't know, that to me, Al Qaeda was a brutal terrorist organization. This was, I think, much more like ISIS, was just a screw loose of depravity. Yeah.
It's it's fascinating how Me Too was such a cultural thing at one point here, and now so many people are like, oh well, there's no proof of this. It's like, well, Israel is actually trying to. They're not releasing a lot of this stuff out of sentiment for the families involved.
Right.
But somehow,
Well, they're losing the information war, Dave. And so
Yeah.
that's I told that to the Israeli embassy as well. I said, you guys are losing.
yeah,
And obviously sensitivities, they can't release this, but they can't tell this story because they're so worried. But I mean, if I was a family member and I saw, one of my loved ones, getting their brains beaten in, I don't know if I'd want that either. But they're losing the information war, and you're right. And one of the amazing things is, how did the United Nations not for 2 months, condemn sexual abuse
right.
against the Israeli women? And the same thing. And again, we're not getting political, but and I've said it on this show a million times. I'm right smack in the center, so everyone's mad at me all the time about everything. So that's good. But the idea of some of these progressive left groups of the left in the United States, marching in support of not the Palestinians. I don't care if you march in support of the Palestinians. That's fine. But basically they're supporting Hamas. Go live there.
Yeah.
How's it going to go for you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with the notion of kind of the progressive left is going to abandon Biden because of his support for Israel. Well, I mean, again, not getting political, but if Trump wins, do you think that you and the progressive left are going to have an easy time? I mean, there's no thought process here. And so I think that a lot of progressives, a lot of American Jews feel abandoned. Look, the Jewish community was integral in the civil rights movement. And I think a lot of American Jews feel abandoned by the left because all of a sudden they realize that they're not with them and that they're supporting their enemy.
I mean, one of my really good friends personally, he was very pro BLM. He was very pro, he marched and everything like that. And now now he feels betrayed. He feels completely.
I mean, BLM in Chicago put a poster out with the fucking Hamas guy in a hang glider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And I guarantee you there was tons of progressive American Jews who were marching in support of BLM, which is fine.
Right.
But ultimately I think there'll be a feeling of or there is a feeling of betrayal. I mean, a couple of my friends who are definitely from the left, they've been watching Fox News all the time. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's your experiences matter.
Now, what's happening? That you get a sense, or from what you've heard in the administration, because we saw a number of staffers, White House staffers, were calling for ceasefire today when they're actually going against their bosses. Is this creating problem? Do you think this could lead to intelligence issues in the future?
Well, so look, I mean, that kind of, I said it actually on air today, this morning on MSNBC. I said I found it ridiculous that you have junior White House staffers calling for a ceasefire when 30 plus Americans are dead. What does a ceasefire mean? A ceasefire means, again, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about all the time. A pause for humanitarian aid is different. A ceasefire usually is weeks or months of a cessation of hostilities.
Right.
But calling for that means that we're letting Hamas get away with what they did to 30 plus Americans. So but I think you bring up a really interesting point. So, we worked in the executive branch. If you don't like something that your boss is doing, you can fucking quit. There's no democracy. I don't get a chance to set Afghan or Iraqi or Syrian policy. I was there, with the U.S. government when we fucked up Syria 6 ways to Sunday. Mm-hmm. When we didn't enforce a red line, where all of our Syrian allies, in essence, were abandoned. But that the policy decisions, good or bad, are made by your kind of political masters, and you're in the executive branch, and you're, in our case, you're kind of the tip of the spear. You're a sharp sword for the U.S. government. But if you don't like it, you can quit, and you can, and you should, and you can speak out. And I have no problem with that. But the idea that people are protesting who work in the White House policy, I find utterly ludicrous. Now, I guess that's maybe I don't understand Generation Z. Again, same thing that, a lot of people in the State Department and AID are upset about this. That's fine. There's a dissent channel, use that. But you see some people go on social media. Again, not the right thing to do. And because, you didn't join the military, you don't have a contract. Feel free to quit and to go to the Washington Post, the New York Times, or anyone else. And amazingly enough, and so one of the things that what angers me a little bit is you hear all this dissent. One person has quit in the entire U.S. government, an official from the State Department. I admire him. You did the right, and he spoke out. Okay, got it. That's what you should do. But the idea that you're protesting outside the White House, I found that unbelievable. And I will tell you that I've talked to so many of my friends. First of all, it's not happening in the intelligence community or in DoD, for the most part. I think there was one senior agency analyst who put something on Facebook, but but for the most part, you don't see it. Interestingly enough, in DoD or the IC, we do our fucking job.
Right.
Dave, when you, in your career, I'm sure there's plenty of things where you're kind of scratching your head thinking, hey, this isn't really the right thing to do.
Right.
It's not a democracy.
Or I don't agree with it. Yeah. Right.
You don't agree with it.
Right. Right. Yeah. So what do you think is, and the other thing you mentioned, I just want to go back to this real quick. You say ceasefire, but Hamas is constantly launching rockets into Israel. It's like you can call for a ceasefire. It doesn't matter what Israel does. Hamas is going to keep on. They're going to keep on attacking regardless.
Well, I think that in some, I'm not giving Hamas a break on this, but I think that the ceasefire would definitely aid Hamas more.
Yeah.
Because they can regroup, they can move people throughout the tunnels, they can resupply and rest. They're getting their asses kicked. The IDF does not want a ceasefire.
Right.
Period. And so think back to the success that we had in the conflict zones, and I remember this clearly. Ordinarily we think that intelligence drives operations, but in fact, operations can drive intelligence. What does that mean? And your listeners are going to understand. So instead of Shin Bet giving the IDF targets, IDF is gonna move throughout the Gaza Strip. They're gonna find what? They're gonna find a weapons cache. They're gonna find a Hamas safe house. They'll do SSE, sensitive site exploitation. They'll capture Hamas operatives and do battlefield interrogations. That's driving the intelligence picture. So in fact, the more that the Israelis move in the Gaza Strip, the more intel they gain, and they can and stopping that all comes to a halt. And then they become, more blind. And in fact, the last, again, it was called a ceasefire. The last pause of a couple of days for the hostage release. One of the things I was surprised the Israelis agreed on is they stopped flying drones over Gaza. Hamas insisted on that. But again, that's, maybe you can offset. I mean, I know we have an MQ-9 there assisting in hostage, recovery. And with an MQ-9, I knew you don't have to be over Gaza. You can offset a little bit. But I'm not sure that the Israelis' capability. But ultimately, the cessation of fighting in any way does not aid the Israelis. That's why they want to keep going. I think, let me just throw one thing out there. I know we're kind of moving fast and furious, but something happened today, and I'm interested in your take on this too. And it's tragic, is that the IDF killed 3 Israeli hostages, who actually had escaped. And just in the fog of war, and at a time where Hamas was sending out suicide bombers, 3 civilians came out, and the IDF killed them. And there's a couple of things on that. One is there's no one who's going to feel worse than those soldiers,
right?
On what happened, and there's all this bullshit on social media about this. But ultimately, what I think is going to happen, and already the Mossad chief David Barnea has said that he's going to go back and actually meet the Qataris again, because the hostage issue is so emotional in Israel. And let me just kind of say one thing on that, is that one thing that I find admirable is that the Israelis, and we do to some extent, not as much, but we do have this, is that the in terms of hostages, but the Israelis, they have a pact with their government that if you're taken, the Israelis are going to get you back, and they have traded. Yahya Sinwar was released from Israeli jail in a hostage, in a prisoner exchange where one Israeli soldier was released for 1,000 Hamas operatives, including Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas. So the Israelis will kind of push this, and it becomes extremely emotional. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure from the families now that 3 hostages were killed. So I think that you might see these negotiations start again. The problem with this is, and the reason why the last round fell apart is, it was abundantly clear, and I had kind of sources tell me this as well, is that the sexual abuse of the hostages is something that hasn't been reported. Now, it hasn't been reported, again, at the request of the families.
Right.
And also, I was told that Hamas members had threatened the hostages who were released that if you talk about this, other people are going to be at risk. But ultimately, if Hamas was to release more of these hostages, the stories of sexual abuse are going to be horrific.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, Hamas does not have an incentive either. That's why the negotiations broke down last time. And so it'll be interesting to see, who's on if there was to be any kind of exchange, because I think what has happened to some of these people is going to be pretty barbaric.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just the reports from witnesses from Nova were talking about some of that depravity.
Right.
And, some of the discussions that Hamas members had on tape, talking about the women, like take this one, you know, it was very clear what their intentions were.
You know what you have though. So I thought about this a lot, and I just talked to a journalist who's really close to the situation too. He's going back and forth to Israel, and he's studied this forever. And there's a difference between if you're living in the Gaza Strip under and you're a member of Hamas, which is an Islamic fundamentalist movement, in which if you look at a woman before marriage, or if the woman looks at another man, they're condemned. And then all of a sudden, you look right across the way. Literally, the lights over in Israel, where there's a rave, where there's gorgeous women scantily clad. And so, I think there. This is just my view of kind of the what happens in these kind of Islamic fundamentalist terrorist movements. I mean, there's sexual repression there. I know we're getting deep here, but the sexual repression is an issue. And I think these, while the Hamas, we know from the debriefs that the Hamas leadership or some kind of religious edict came down that they were permitted to kind of go rape and pillage and do all the things. But I think there's some, I think they went crazy there, because all of a sudden you're seeing these beautiful Israeli women. They've been repressed their whole life. They've been told what they can't do yet, and they've just been given the dispensation to kind of go down a road that, I mean, nobody does.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. There's certainly some psychology behind this. I'm sure.
Well, but it's not out of pocket for that demographic, because we saw it with ISIS too. We saw the sex slaves.
Yeah, the sex slaves, right?
Yeah, I think it was the Yazidis mostly, right? But that they would keep and trade and whatnot. So how does I mean, it's crazy when you talk about how much money Qatar gave Palestine, because there are 2 million people in Palestine, roughly, right? 2 to 5 million
in Gaza,
right? Correct, in Gaza. And if Qatar gave Gaza 100 million, I mean, that divides up pretty well if that's what you were going to do, and gets everybody a fairly decent quality of life, or build
or
build substantial infrastructure.
Hamas stole it all.
Yeah.
And built this tunnel system.
So talking about Hamas leadership, and just like Arafat didn't live in Gaza or he didn't live in Palestine, right? We have these other Hamas leaders who live in luxury in other parts of the world, who are, going on Mary or whatever and making these statements, about how Israel should die and whatnot. What should happen to them, and why isn't it? I guess that's a loaded question.
Hamas leadership,
yeah. So
okay, there's 2 parts of this. So one is, you wonder if the Palestinian public is going to see the hypocrisy, and kind of it's grotesque to see how the leadership living in luxury hotels in Doha, or somewhere in Beirut, somewhere in Algiers. They certainly are suffering with the rest of them. But it comes down to, I think, that we're going to see, you can call it whatever you want to call it, a Munich 2. And so the Shin Bet chief Ronan Bar already kind of announced this. It's kind of funny because Shin Bet, I didn't think it would have a role, but he basically said that, hey, the Israeli cabinet met and we've been given the task of tracking all the Hamas leadership down everywhere. Not only inside Gaza but externally. These guys are dead man walking. Clearly, that is going to be in Mossad's number one in their tasking order, and they're good at this. And so I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One is they have to hold these individuals responsible. By the way, a U.S. official yesterday, it was unnamed. Too bad. I don't like that when people say this anonymously, but they said Yahya Sinwar has U.S. blood on his hands, and he's a dead man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's the U.S. advocating for Israel conducting this kind of extrajudicial killing and assassination. By the way, I totally support this.
Yeah.
So I think the Israelis are going to go to the ends of the earth to track these people down, and it will last days, weeks, months, or years. There's no statute of limitations in the minds of Mossad, and perhaps Shin Bet has a role too. Or Israeli military intelligence, but this is going to be, what my old friends at Mossad certainly are going to do. And let me tell you, I'll tell you a funny story. I was in, when I was serving in Damascus, I went to, this was just crazy. This was 2006 or 7. I can't even remember. I was there 05 to 07, and it was Libyan National Day. And what does that mean if you're a U.S. official? You got to go to national days. But hey, Libyan national day, this is when we actually had kind of resumed diplomatic contacts with Libya. We had opened up a kind of a pseudo embassy, and I actually was on the ground there in '05, helping open up our office there. Whole other story on that. But so I go to Libyan National Day because I thought it would be kind of amusing to talk to the Libyan ambassador about this. And nobody else from the U.S. Embassy wanted to go. So I was the schmuck who was going to go. And I go there. And who was at Libyan National Day in Damascus, Syria? It was Ahmed Jibril, who is the infamous head of the PFLP-GC, a notorious terrorist group with a lot of American blood in his hands, and Khalid Mishal, one of the leaders of Hamas. And and the rest of the diplomatic community was, enormously amused by the fact that I was there. But everyone there, including the Libyan ambassador, I never, of course, met either of these individuals because I couldn't have done that. But they all said, "Well, Marc, I'm glad you're here because there won't be an Israeli airstrike because they know that a U.S. official is here." And what Mossad lost on October 7th, what the Israeli security establishment lost, was that aura. Mm-hmm. That fear. And I don't give a shit who how tough you think you are as a Palestinian terrorist or Hezbollah, Lebanese terrorist. They are scared of the reach of Israeli intelligence services, but that aura was shattered. And so what Israel needs to do first of all, they want to avenge the deaths of 1,200 of their citizens, but they need to restore that. And so kind of that long arm of the Israeli intelligence going off and mythically killing folks overseas like they did after Munich.
Right.
And they've done it on other occasions too. They've done it in Syria. They've done it in Iran. I think that's really important for them to do. And I actually have no doubt they're going to do this.
Yeah.
Again, if there's nothing more satisfying than being in a position right now of a Mossad officer whose task is to find, fix, and help finish some of these individuals who are responsible for the brutality of October 7th. And who knows, what's happening, kind of our joint efforts. Obviously, it takes a presidential finding. I don't know if we have that when it comes to this. If the U.S. certainly is helping in targeting in Gaza. I don't know about targeting overseas, but there also were reports, by the way, that some of the Hamas leadership in Qatar has fled. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not, but
yeah,
because the Israelis told the Qataris, and the same thing with Turks, we're coming at you.
Yeah,
we don't give a shit. And a lot of protests from Qatar and Turkey, but I think that there were some reports that some of the leadership in Qatar, I think they might have fled to Algeria or not. I don't know if that's true, but not a surprise. Well, and the Israelis will just keep tracking them.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you mentioned Hezbollah, and it seemed to me by the rhetoric coming from Hamas shortly after October 7th that they thought that Hezbollah was going to join in this fight, and then all of a sudden Hezbollah's like, "No, you guys got this. You're doing great. Good job.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah. Go team."
Do you think that there was like an agreement for participation at one point, and then Hezbollah just backed off, or do you think that Hamas just kind of made that assumption?
Well, they run these joint operation centers where Hamas and Hezbollah are co-located in Beirut. But none of this matters without their mama, their papa, which is Iran.
Right.
So the Iranian, so ultimately, Hezbollah is the ultimate Iranian proxy in the region. They have a stake in the Lebanese government. They're entrenched there, and for Hezbollah to join the war, I think Iran does not want that because the Israelis have no appetite for this now. And so and this is a really great point, Dave, that you raise now, because the risk of escalation is not in Gaza. The risk of escalation is all eyes are north. All intelligence assets are pointing north, whether it's human intelligence, signals intelligence, certainly imagery, because Hezbollah has 150,000 missiles, not rockets, missiles. Aimed at Tel Aviv, at Israel, and the Israelis, frankly, are itching to kind of level Beirut, and they've said very publicly, if you want to have it happen in Beirut, like what happened in Gaza, go for it. And so I think there's a couple of things going on in Israel. Well, first of all, the U.S. wants nothing of this. They do not want this to occur, which is why we parked 2 carrier battle groups. That's 16 aircraft squadrons, and then a U.S. Nuclear sub with 150 Tomahawks. And so ultimately that's the show to Iran. Hey, don't let Hezbollah unleash on Israel, because we're gonna our targets are dialed in Lebanon and Beirut, and that seems to have held. The problem is that Israel and Hezbollah have this escalation ladder. And it's really interesting. And the Washington Institute has done a lot of good kind of research on this. And so it's where you strike, 5 miles or 10 miles or 15 miles across the borders. And so, and there's a gradual ladder, and that's going up now. And one of the things there's two things that can happen. That one is that the Israelis say, fuck it, we're not doing another 10-7. We are going to preempt. And there is, and the IDF has been pushing for this. The Israeli defense minister is like, yes, we need to take care of this. We can't have another surprise. I don't necessarily blame them for that feeling. And the other part is miscalculation. So, in these exchanges, and Hezbollah and Israel are fighting every day, and people are dying. But I'm not as worried about, the Israelis can kind of whack a whole bunch of Hezbollah folks because the Iranians really don't want this. If Hezbollah gets a lucky shot and kills, 30 Israelis, it's game on.
Yeah.
And so that is really the trigger point for what could be a really wider regional war, which, people ask me all the time, where's the U.S. intervene? If it's full on, Iron Dome is getting overwhelmed, tens of thousands of missiles raining down, our jets are taking off from those carriers. And we have communicated that directly to the Iranians and to the Lebanese. There's been National Security Council officials traveling back and forth to Beirut constantly. But again, this is kind of the point of events on the ground can kind of drive things. So
I mean, is the U.S. just trying to keep a pot on the kettle? Because we also have not taken. It's like for the Houthis, and I want, if you don't mind, I'd like you.
Let's shift to Houthis.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with that situation, it's almost like we sent them a strongly worded letter.
This is killing me. And I don't get it. So, one of the things about the administration is, they do things fairly well. I mean, I think that the support for Israel has been the right policy. And then sometimes we're too cautious, and we'll get to Ukraine in a second. But in this case, the Houthis are conducting repeated attacks almost daily on kind of international shipping. I think that Central Command is itching to do something about it, but I think the White House is holding them back because of worry of escalation. Once again, it's that fear of things spiraling out of control. Now, I don't think it would take much for the United States Navy or U.S. Air Force assets located in the region to hit Houthi targets. As you know, and I'm going out of my kind of comfort zone here. Every kind of Houthi launch is a point of origin. There's a point of origin delineated where this attack was emanated from. Very easily picked up by U.S. technical means. We could put missiles, aircraft, anything on that probably within minutes.
Right?
Am I wrong?
No. Fast. I mean,
faster.
Time of flight.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I think the ship systems could lock onto the origin point almost immediately after the launch. And,
so I don't know why we haven't done that. Now I understand that CENTCOM, is very frustrated that they're not able to respond. And so what does this get to? This gets to the notion of deterrence. Deterrence is not working.
Wait, do we have deterrence? Because I haven't really seen much.
No. And same thing with the Iranian, proxies in Iraq and Syria. Now we have hit back a little bit stronger. I mean, there was kind of that. I'm sorry. This is just one of the things that I enjoy. That kind of joyous AC-130 strike of about 10 days ago, where local commanders, local U.S. military were able to kind of see kind of point of origin of strikes. I can't remember if it was Iraq or Syria, but whatever. There's an AC-130 in the area, and they kind of blasted these guys. Right. And that was that didn't need any kind of authorities from anywhere above, which is good. But ultimately, we're not deterring the Iranian proxies, whether it's the Houthis or the proxies in Iraq and Syria, and that's a problem. And so, why is it a problem? It's a problem because and you remember this from time in conflict zones. You get shot at, you got to shoot back.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty simple. And Leon Panetta, God bless him, at the Reagan at the Reagan Institute 2 weeks ago, just says it as clear as anything that I believe. He said, if someone shoots at an American. Someone shoots an American, with a missile, we got to kill that person.
Right.
Doesn't get any clearer than that.
Right.
And we're not doing that.
Right.
And so, and so there is no, with the might of the U.S. military, which is extraordinary.
Right.
It's the fucking Houthis. Are you kidding me?
Right.
And we're not doing anything. To me, that's exceedingly frustrating. And what does that mean? And so if you translate that, which gets me really upset, is okay. So what in essence the administration is saying is, until an American dies, we're not going to do anything. Well, that's totally immoral in my view.
Right.
And I remember when I was a base chief in Afghanistan, we were shot at every day, from across the border in Pakistan. I was authorized to return fire always. And we had some wild cross-border engagements. And at one point, and this is, there's a little too much inside baseball, people were getting uncomfortable with this. And I remember, a certain, I'm not going to say who it was, but a certain, agency leader was like, hey, Marc, you need to call back and ask us permission to return fire. And I said, send me home, close the base.
Yeah.
Can't do that. In fact, I'm going to tell you after the entire engagement's done. And I remember the paramilitary officers from ground branch there, I was really fighting for them. And they really appreciated that because they said, this is not sustainable. When we're fired upon, we have to fire back. We have to kill the enemy who's trying to kill us. We'll tell everybody at high or later, sure.
Yeah.
No problem with that. But it's long done by the time, we're calling up and writing a report. And I'm not getting on the horn screaming, oh my God, we're under attack. We'll take care of it on the ground. And so in essence, we're certainly not doing that in these places. And I fear it's going to take the loss of U.S. lives. And that's not fair to the American military.
Right.
I'll tell you two stories. One is I just, I've been giving college lectures all over the place. So I've been at the Naval Academy a lot. And I was the last time I was at the Naval Academy when I was talking to the midshipmen, and I was like, hey, I just realized like you guys are all, in your last year, like, do you know everybody? Do you know people out in the deployed right now in the CENTCOM AO? And they're like, yeah, we talk to them all the time. And I was, so I'm thinking like these men and women who I'm talking to are going to be on a ship. Conceivably, it's what is December now? They graduate in May. They could be on one of those ships. It's not fair to put them at risk.
Right.
And that pisses me off because we don't have to. We can change that policy. Last piece is with the Houthis. I'll never forget. The last trip I made to Sana'a before we closed up shop. God, when was that? I might have been there in 2014, 13, 14. But I remember the case officers coming back and they're like, there's a really fucked up group on the streets. It's not AQAP. Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is what we were battling. And
right.
There was a major kind of under the table war between the USIC and military and AQAP for years. They said, but this is a group. They're chanting "Death to America." And they brought me back a poster one time. I was just visiting from headquarters, and they said, but they're a little kind of fucked up. And it was the Houthis.
Yeah.
But we're letting this kind of ragtag group, control the sea lanes, and it's ridiculous.
And that's what I was gonna, say, because it's not just that they have actually fired on U.S. ships, and because we have the ability to stop it, it's like, okay, no harm, no foul, haha, like a kid brother. But they've taken over major ships. They've shut down a shipping lane. Maersk, an international shipper, just came out and said.
Incredible, shocking,
yeah.
But good for them, good for Maersk. Like they said, hey, everyone, fucking do something.
Yeah,
this is, this is our special operations capability. The Navy SEALs are, this is their thing.
Yeah,
this is old Captain Phillips shit.
Yeah,
and so come on.
Yeah,
but we're not allowing, we're not employing any of these resources. I don't get it.
I want to go over our notes from our talk real quick to make sure we haven't missed anything as we go.
One quick thing I wanted to kind of raise was kind of the U.S. role in this, and I in terms of the U.S. intelligence community, and this is I wrote something and I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal and I got a rash of shit for this, but so this was considered the October 7th was considered an Israeli intelligence failure. But I think you have to kind of unpack it a little bit too, and so the U.S. has a little bit of responsibility is the wrong word, but let me just kind of walk you through my thinking on this. And I said we have a little bit. There's a little bit of blame on us, and Warren Strobel, who's a great journalist for the Wall Street Journal, said that he got that agency folks really pushed back on what I said. But ultimately, it's that decisions are made in terms of resource allocation, and so I sat in 1996 in the Hamas branch. That branch doesn't exist anymore. Well, why is that? Well, Hamas, we didn't think had an external operations capability. Interesting, a whole bunch of arrests recently in Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
Yeah. Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, I think it was. But but because we had bigger fish to fry, which was what obviously Al Qaeda, and so so we shifted resources, but we did that. There's something called the NIPF, the National Intelligence Priorities Framework. This is the weird geeky shit that if you did my job in the past, and that means where are we going to put our money and our resources? Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, we're gonna shift it all to Al Qaeda, but ultimately, we still have to have coverage of Hamas, but we're going to give it to the Israelis. We're going to cede all collection to the Israelis. You know where this is going now, because we did. So there's no more American human capability. There's no more SIGINT. We're really going to say, Israel, you got this.
Right.
And once again, 30 plus Americans were killed on October 7th. 8 Americans still held hostage. And so you kind of look back and you say, we understand why the U.S. made those decisions. I get it. No one's going to get disciplined for this, but we made decisions that were actually turned out to be maybe the wrong one. Mm-hmm. And maybe in the future, when we say, we can't cover this target, maybe don't go, 100%. Give it to a liaison service, maybe keep a little bit of residual, what we call unilateral collection. And I'm not sure we did that. Mm-hmm. I'm just surmising this. I wasn't there for these decisions, but then what happened? So then, and I would also say that, what's the role of the American intelligence community? Well, we want to prevent strategic surprise. I can't imagine, Bill Burns, the CIA director, of Real Haynes, the head of the DNI, going in to see President Biden when he says, what the fuck happened on October 7th? Well, a 3,000-man army invaded Israel. Did we not know?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Like, that's not good.
Right.
If I was the head of the USIC, I'm like, that's not a good day.
Right.
And so, okay, so I just kind of throw that out there, but no one ever wants to criticize anything. And so I got a lot of pushback. But I think the CIA, NSA, the USIC, certainly U.S. military has rebounded. And so what do you have? You have an MQ-9 flying hostage recovery. You have obviously an intelligence fusion cell at the embassy. You have, and this has kind of been reported, I think you guys have talked about it, different SOF units involved in hostage recovery, whether they're, in Israel or hanging out in Cyprus, wherever the hell.
I'm going to cut in here. Jack wrote an article about what's going on, like how JSOC spun up in Cyprus and is ready to go for any kind of hostage rescue and stuff like that.
So we have responded, really well, and of course the intelligence support. We're kind of pumping intel in there, and so I think the U.S. has certainly recovered. And again, and there was an article, I think the Wall Street Journal, saying U.S. SIGINT, we're actually now conducting unilateral SIGINT missions back there. So we can turn on a dime. It's an area we know very well, and I think that the relationship between the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence communities has always been very good. Some strains here and there sometimes, but it's probably going full bore now. But look, we weren't covering this on October 6th, Marc, and you just got to admit that.
Yeah, out of curiosity, we're in Gaza is this kind of weird area, especially the relationship to Israel and what's going on right now, because if it were Somalia or Yemen or the Philippines and 10 Americans were killed and 8 were hostage, what in your experience, what would be our intelligence and military response to that at this point in time?
Right. I mean, that's a mass casualty terrorist event. A task force is set up. There's embassies are mobilized. CTC goes on war footing. The beach and Bragg, are at 24/7. People start moving right away. Right. And so there's an enormous industry in response to this. And so, again, when Americans are in harm or killed or captured, that's our thing. There's nothing that kind of gets you going every day. Like, you'll work 24 hours a day, weeks on end. And so, I imagine that's what's happening now. And I think that I would hope that there would be some questions asked, though, about events before this, because okay, so let's again, it's the idea of can we have global coverage as the intelligence community? Well, I think that we can certainly try, but to have kind of ceded all this to the Israelis in Gaza was ultimately was a mistake.
I'm going to ask you to put on your sort of imagination cap, because anything can happen, but how do you think this winds down or ends? Because obviously Israel can't stay at it forever. They
Right.
cannot get every member of Hamas, no matter
Right.
how hard they try. But Hamas is still going to live right next door, and they're going to build
Yeah.
up again, and they're going to plan the next operation to do this, because Hamas's goal is to bring hate and pain onto the Palestinians, right? Like that's to eradicate Israel and and create martyrs. What is going on in Gaza right now, Hamas planned for.
Oh, so what a great point you made, Dave. So in there, I mean, you can make the same argument about Osama bin Laden in September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
They planned for a massive response.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so right now, Hamas thinks they've won.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why a ceasefire, I think, is so damaging. If Hamas, they've gotten their asses kicked after this, but Israel is now in many circles an international pariah because of the collateral damage, the civilian casualties. So Hamas thinks they've won.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're happy to kind of call it a day. I mean, they're actually, their spokesmen are saying this right now. Yeah, we want a ceasefire.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
And the Israelis are saying hell no. But your question is really important, because I'm really good at doing what we've done in the last hour and 22 minutes, talking about the kind of the tactics and counterterrorism. But when you say, how does this end? I think the smartest thing for an intelligence officer or a former intelligence officer is to say, like, I don't really know, because there's so many different variables. And ironically, I think the biggest variable in this is Israeli politics. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you why. Because ultimately, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is enormously unpopular, probably has about a 5%, popularity rating there, would lose in the next election. There is no incentive for him to have this war wind down, because the second it does, there's going to be elections and he will be out of power. And any politician, particularly someone as kind of cynical as Netanyahu, wants to remain in power. The other part too is that he very much the notion of how this could conceivably end, which is some type of two-state entity where there's some kind of good governance, Palestinian something, Palestinian Authority 2.0. All this he is fundamentally against. He does not want a Palestinian state ever. And so, I think this goes where the Israeli electorate sends it. So, a new Israeli government is absolutely critical.
Right.
The Arab states have said, the Emiratis, the Saudis, who have, gazillion dollars, have said, hey, we're going to come in and rebuild, but only if there's a two-state solution and it kind of a viable Palestinian entity, not Hamas.
Right.
So I think that, but so much it depends on the Israeli electorate. Excuse me. This is D's making me drink all this ouzo, so I'm coughing. It's your fault. Let me throw one other thing out there to discuss, and this is in relation to this, because I think it's really important. There's the notion of the Arab street. What does that mean? So, American embassy officials are sending in cables saying the U.S. has lost the Arab street for generations, and my response to that is that doesn't fucking matter, because so much of this is kind of generated by Arab governments who want to give their miserable populations some kind of valve to vent.
Right.
I'm sorry. There's and when I say miserable populations, that's not being fair. But so what really matters in terms of the Arab world, and that has to do with the Arab intelligence services. And so what I've been asking people is, someone write this story. I can't. I don't have the sources, but the whole thing goes to shit if security cooperation breaks down between Israel and Jordan, or Israel and Egypt, or Israel and Qatar, or Israel and Saudi Arabia. Israel actually is the security blanket for Jordan. So you see the Jordanian foreign minister, the Jordanian king, howling, protests all over the place. The last I heard from kind of sources I had in GID, they were telling Israel, keep going. I'm being dead serious, Dave.
Yeah. And
so, so and why does that matter even in the context of what we're talking about is, so everyone's saying that Israel has to kind of do the best they can and remove Hamas as a threat. But then when it comes to rebuilding, the Arab states will come in, but you got to have a different Israeli government in power.
But the thing is, though, also, I think, I mean, in addition to that, because I agree with you, and in addition to that, anytime a two-state solution has been brought to the table or anything else like that, whoever was running whoever was making money off Palestine, whether it was Arafat or I mean, not Arafat, but whoever was making money, because Gaza and Palestine is basically it's a money making scheme for whomever runs runs Gaza. So actually getting them to the table and agreeing to it.
Well, then, Gaza's a problem because, who's going to come in after that? I mean, the Hamas has kind of run the entire infrastructure there. But I think you bring up an interesting point that at the times where we thought that a settlement was closest, Arafat ended up rejecting it.
Right.
And that is kind of the tragedy behind this as well, for sure. But, it's okay as a former intelligence officer say, how does this end? You say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's so many variables, but I really do look to the Israeli elections. That's going to be key to getting Netanyahu out of power.
Yeah.
And that is the only path forward to this kind of having any kind of resolution that means something.
Yeah. It's tough for me because, having, studied Arabic and had a lot of Arabic teachers and talking to them about, the region and their impressions, and as citizens, none of them were government officials, but
right.
From my Egyptian instructor, Jordanian, Lebanese, they were all the opinion that Palestine is not going anywhere because Palestine is a great foil to Israel. So nobody's opening their borders to Palestinians. Nobody's letting.
Well, the Egyptians are not. I mean, it's unbelievable.
I mean, Jordan killed.
They're terrified of this. They don't want refugee kind of.
So nobody's going to open their borders, and the thing is that as long as there's the Israel-Palestinian conflict, there's always a foil against Israel to claim that Israel is abusing Arabs, and so it's that Palestine operates, or Palestine creates an opportunity for them to complain about Israel.
Let me throw. I just thought of one other great story. One of the fun things about coming on the show here is that I can say things that I can't say in a 30-second TV soundbite. I think I put that out on social media today when I said I was excited coming on. But and this goes to my, so obviously people are going to walk away saying, "Holy shit, Marc is this like crazy pro-Israel kill them all nutbag." But actually, no. And let me tell you a story, because I really do sympathize with the plight of the Palestinians and the Israelis. And so this is going to be kind of on the opposite end, is that, anyone who wants to have an idea about the conflict's got to visit. And I was going into Ramallah back in 2016, and I hadn't been to Israel since 2010 or 11 is when I left Jordan. So when I was at the assigned there. And so 2016, we're going in, I'm with our kind of the head of our liaison to the Palestinian Intelligence Service. We're going to see the head of the Palestinian service in Ramallah, and as we're going in, I'm like, "Holy shit!" They've built a whole lot of walls here. Like it was very imposing. And we're going in, and of course, what people don't understand is often as a U.S. official, you're not treated all that well by even the Israeli border guards. They can be total obnoxious assholes. Frankly, they don't give a shit if I have a black passport. Because I'm going into the Palestinian Authority areas, so clearly I'm doing something that's not going to be in their mind something positive. And so, but I'm going in there, and my colleague, again, who's listening right now, as he's texting me wildly because he thinks I'm being a pro-Israel nutbag, he said, "Tell the story." And so we're going in there, and he looked at me and he said, "Welcome to the zoo." And it was shocking to me, and that was the notion that the Palestinians are caged in there. Mm. And so it goes kind of the fundamental notion is that this is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. The way the Palestinians are treated is not sustainable, and you got to go see it. If you're, I remember, this is going to sound horrible. Like we're having a drink at somewhere, in a bar in Jerusalem, watching the Palestinians in the old city battling with the Israelis, with the IDF. Mm-hmm. It's just it's not sustainable because the Palestinians certainly are not treated well. Mm-hmm. Both in certainly in the West Bank, and Gaza is not ruled by Israel, but there's got to be a better way. And mm-hmm. You can't help, and that's what there was so I go and I go to the Israeli embassy. I watch this footage for 46 minutes. I'm outraged. But then yesterday, a really good reporter, Clarissa Ward of CNN. I mean, she's a great war reporter, and she went in with kind of snuck into Gaza and went to visit the Emirati hospital there, a field hospital, and the report was kind of heartbreaking at the civilian casualties, at the kind of humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. And I sit back after that, I'm like, all right, like what am I feeling? What am I doing? And it reminds me of conflict zones where there's so many kind of different moral challenges all the time. I mean, I remember, this is a terrible story. I'll get in trouble for this. I remember when we were in Iraq, and we had some assets who were giving us, targeting data. And I sent some coordinates, and it was relayed up to a Marine F-18. And he came around and he was trying to hit a target and he missed, and he hit a building, a fucking apartment building. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? That's my fault. And that happens constantly. And some innocent people probably died that day. Maybe not. Maybe they were evacuated. I have no idea. 100% possible that no one was there. But, bad stuff happens like that. And innocent people get hurt. And so, there's all these kind of moral ambiguities in war. And I don't know, I go back to, again, one of the great victories of the war against ISIS was Mosul 2017. 10,000 civilians died. And that's considered a great U.S. success. I don't know.
No, it is challenging. You and I have talked about this. The footage is like, it goes outside of war. The footage goes
right.
outside of what the normal humanitarian crisis that happens in a war. The footage, even one of those guys, if he had done that in the United States, it would be on all the news channels as this barbaric act.
Yeah. Well, Dave, let me say something. So if the equivalent 1,200, if 40,000 Americans had died, and a third of them had been beheaded, beaten to death, and raped, whatever country did that wouldn't have a capital. I'm sorry. So Americans don't understand this. And we would have leveled. We were talking about that. I mean, Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe said this. And former kind of conservative congressman. He said, if Mexico had done this to us, he just kind of threw this out there. He goes, Mexico City would be. And someone said, would we have tanks outside Mexico City? He said, no, it wouldn't exist. 40,000 Americans, raped and dismembered and defiled. And so I don't know. I mean, you kind of understand the Israeli thinking.
We went to war for 3,000 World Trade Center. We went to war for 4,000 Pearl Harbor. Like
Pearl Harbor was 2,000, I think. It was even smaller. I mean, the numbers. I actually, there's a great Netflix documentary out on World War II. Have you seen that?
No, not yet.
It's really good.
Oh, the one that's colorized. I think
the one that's colorized.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
But I think that the casualty numbers in Pearl Harbor, tragic, terrible, were not as high as I for whatever reason I thought. So
yeah.
And we went to war.
We went to war. We went to war. So
equivalent of 40,000.
So I think, I tend to agree with you that I think that America should be very embarrassed because our anti-Semitism is really showing right now, in the sense that on the right, when you talk about racists and anti-Semites on the right, you always knew they were there. They weren't shy about it. They don dumb little costumes and do rallies and stuff like that. On the left, it was hidden until now.
It's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not hidden anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holy
right.
Shit.
Right.
Look at. I mean,
they could be marching they could be marching alongside Klan members, and it'd be like, you know what I mean? It'd be like.
Which I think is, actually, I'm surprised at that. I love this country, dearly, but I'm disappointed with a lot of what I've seen, especially on college campuses. Now, it's funny because I go around, I talk to colleges. I probably do one lecture every week around the country. I love doing this, and I haven't seen this, but I'm trying to think okay, why am I not seeing this anywhere? And because I'm going to talk to the class that's of national security studies or intelligence studies, that whoever's taking that class is not going to have the propensity to kind of have those feelings. And so but I was I was at I think I did a keynote at GW University's Naval ROTC, kind of their annual conference, and GW has had some problems, and so some of the students were telling me about that too. But it's really unfortunate because a lot of kind of Jewish students are feeling incredibly unsafe. And I thought better of America. And you know what? You can be upset what's happening. If you sympathize with the Palestinians, that's fine. But the idea of glorifying Hamas, and let's not forget, that insanity of last week or the week before, where this it went viral on TikTok about the Bin Laden letter.
Right.
You remember that, Dave?
Yes, I do.
And all of a sudden, Bin Laden is the new Che Guevara.
Right, right.
I mean, what the F happened?
I mean,
I went crazy with that.
Both of them hated homosexuals, so why not, right? Like both of them executed. Yeah, so it's like.
But this is the new darling of the left. Like,
yeah.
And to me, that was something that was really unfortunate. It's. But as I do a lot of media stuff, I've met I certainly run across a lot of kind of senior kind of Jewish leaders, and they will tell you that anti-Semitism was always there.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm certainly disappointed. I mean, when I went to college, you study everything. And there's, you have to be able to talk about everything, and it certainly there's a notion of free speech, but you never let any kind of group feel unsafe,
right?
And that's what we've seen, and that to me was really awful.
I want to move on. Unless there's anything else you want to cover.
I think we're good.
About
I got all my
situation.
notes there. We covered everything.
So the Russia-Ukraine war was hot in the news for a minute. And then, obviously the situation in Israel has taken over, and there aren't too many reports. Have you been following that closely?
Oh, yeah. Big time. And so, to me, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I will tell you why. The last job I had, again, from 16 to 19 when I retired, or maybe late 16, early 17, being the deputy ops chief and then the acting ops chief for all of Europe and Eurasia. So that's 50 countries, 2,000, agency officers, but ultimately a lot of it had to do with what I call putting in the plumbing in a kind of our counter kind of Russia program. And that had to do with supporting the Ukrainians. This was the most kind of non-sexy deployment of all time, where we had folks going out there kind of working, building those personal relationships, training, assistance. The Ukrainians were fighting the good fight in the East, but it wasn't Iraq, it wasn't Al-Qaeda, it wasn't Afghanistan, it wasn't kind of the stuff that's on the news all the time. And then it was. And one of the things that is so great about, the intelligence community being a CIO officer is that's, we build these relationships, and we do them at a time where you don't know if it's going to be an advantage later on. But in this case, it 100% was. And so, the day of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, it's not like Zelensky called up Langley and said, "Who are you?" It's more of, hey, the guys and gals down the street who've been here for years, helping us build capacity, training, and one of the things that happens in our old world is that you have this kind of cycle. There's a rotation cycle where people go back to the same area time and again and again and again. So our people knew the members of Ukrainian military intelligence, for example, because they've been going there for years. And so you build on those relationships, and then what happens? And so you look right now. This is incredible. 2 days ago, the U.S. IC declassified an assessment of Russian losses. And Dave, I don't know if you saw this, but it blew my mind because I knew it was bad. 87% of the Russian standing army anywhere on the day of the Russian invasion has been killed or wounded. 315,000. That's a staggering number. If you think about our assistance programs globally, anywhere in history, never anything like this. But what does that mean? Also, not a single U.S. boot on the ground. There's no U.S. military on the ground. There is no U.S. loss of life, and it's about 5% of our defense budget. And even the assistance program that we're trying to push through Congress now, $60 billion. That's an accounting error, a rounding error in DoD. And so the U.S. has done incredible things for the Ukrainians, and I'm really proud of that because it goes back to kind of that notion of building relationships that we do over time. I've written articles on this before. I firmly believe in kind of the concept of defending forward. Now, does that mean U.S. military deployed all over the world? No, but it does mean U.S. intelligence deployed all over the world. It means our case officers, our paramilitary officers, selectively our analysts, certainly CIA stations, where we're kind of building that capacity, building those relationships that, if they need to be called on, can be, and that certainly is what happened in Ukraine. And so I think that that ultimately this is going to be one of the great success stories. Now, I wish we had done more. And what drives me crazy about this administration is you can make the argument that the administration saved Ukraine, and they did, but they didn't allow Ukraine to win.
Right.
And that means giving them kind of advanced weapons. There was always this, again, what does this go back to, Dave? It's the fear of escalation. Like, this is like kind of, traumatized this administration on every count. Some would say that's being smart and wise. I would say we're being too risk averse, but ultimately, you want to give the other side the ability to win. And so, we're at a point right now in which, the European governments, actually, and this is a really good thing. This is a good, the messaging is all wrong, in terms of how this fight in Congress. This is not a never-ending war. We actually have a never-ending ally in Ukraine, but the never-ending war is we need to get Ukraine through the next year. But Germany just pledged $8 billion. And the European nations actually have pledged even more in military assistance. So this $60 billion will get the Ukrainians through 24. And we've really gotten Europe on board. I think the Estonians said that 0.25% of their entire budget is going to be dedicated to Ukraine. That's pretty impressive. And so I think it's a success story. Certainly, it's a massive intelligence success story. I mean, something that that myself as a former agency officer is incredibly proud of. And we just have to kind of keep resolute. I think that ultimately, maybe I'm being an optimist. I think that they're going to come to some agreement. The Democrats will give on some border stuff. We'll get this $60 billion package forward. And again, it's not a never-ending war.
Right.
It's a never-ending ally. But the Europeans are stepping up, and that's a good thing.
Right.
My 2 cents.
Has there been any major shifts in the battle lines there, or has it been mostly static?
I mean, it has been. This vaunted offensive didn't work. Now, why didn't it work? I think that we didn't give them the means to do it. There's a lot of arguments between the Pentagon and the Ukrainians on strategy. I'm not a military strategist, so I don't know. But ultimately, I think that if you don't have air power, how are you going to make any kind of gains? And F-16s are coming online, but they're coming online late.
Right.
The ATACMS missiles, these long-range missiles, these ATACMS missiles drove the Russian Black Sea fleet out of Sevastopol.
Right.
But there's no many. We gave them like 20. There's no more left. I mean, it's maddening to me.
Right.
And again, it's because of this indecision and this trepidation and fear of escalation in the NSC that drives me nuts. It's the same thing we talked about before about the worries of escalation in the Middle East. I think that the U.S. could have a much more aggressive foreign policy. By the way, this is also not a Democrat versus Republican thing. I don't know if a president, Haley or DeSantis or Trump would have a different view of this, but I certainly think that we can be much more aggressive, and we have this tremendous military power. We should use it, be smart about it. But again, not all is lost in Ukraine. I think that the key thing it's 2024 now. Ukraine is running out of ammunition, and they're running out of air defense, and Europeans is not going to come online. So we got to get them what they need. Over the next year. I wish that the administration would make that argument. I think the GOP would respond to that because they're concerned about a never-ending conflict.
Right.
But my point is, it won't be.
Right.
Europeans are going to step up. They have.
Right.
They pledged this. But just this as former military, like the whole kind of capacity and production, it just takes a while to ramp up. We'll get there, but we got to get them through this next. If you say, "Hey, we're going to give the $60 billion," and then Europe's got to take over, that's fine. And I think the Ukrainians would accept that. But I think the messaging has been all screwed up on this.
I don't blame like the GOP's view for or whoever in the GOP, because I think that there are these hawks basically, or these Russia hawks that it doesn't matter if they're left or right, they're just Russia hawks. Who through last through these administrations, and their goal has been to bleed Russia. Like, they didn't want Ukraine to win a decisive victory in no time flat, because that doesn't serve the goal of economically and militarily harming Russia to that, to a massive degree. So, when we talk about just money, because you mentioned the ATACMS and talk about F-16s, when we talk about money, it's like, well, if you give me $10 worth of aid in BBs or $10 worth of aid in shotgun shells, it makes a significant difference in my ability to, to defend my home. And I think that some people see as U.S. as have been giving Ukraine BBs, and we're just going to keep giving BBs, even though it's a meat grinder for them, it's also a meat grinder for Russia. And that's the long-term goal of some of these people deep in the administration.
I think that, you have a different view of this if you've been on the ground working with local forces, with indigenous forces. And so I always think about things I did in the past with the Kurds, for example, other Iraqis, Syrians, Afghans, for sure. And, the U.S. makes a lot of promises, and, and very often we don't kind of uphold those. And so if I wasn't retired, I would hope, I certainly would have volunteered. Maybe I was too senior, but fuck it, I'd take a demotion. Like, I'd want to be in the Ukraine AO. I can't say anything more, but I'd want to be around that area. So if you're looking at someone, and it would probably be someone from Ukrainian military intelligence who we're working with, and you say, we're gonna help you win. By the way, I also know that your sister and your brother were killed. Your home is no longer, and so you are under absolute threat from the Russians. But we're going to do everything possible. But then your government, in this case the U.S. government, doesn't do enough. These are really hard. That was the hardest part of my job before, is dealing with that. And I remember in the Syria program where literally senior U.S. officials would say, we're just going to give the Syrian opposition enough to get to the negotiating table. And I said, that's fine if you're an armchair quarterback in D.C. at the NSC. But if you're on the front lines every day living with the Syrian opposition, how the fuck do you say that? And so the same thing with Ukrainians, where they say, we know you have ATACMS. The same thing with, the Abrams, the tanks were late, F-16s were way late. Why can't you give them to us? Like, my family's dying.
Right.
And so maybe that's the age-old kind of, I had this conversation with a lot of people here in DC, because this is the way I think of things. And they're always like, well, Mark, you don't understand the greater strategic good and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, I look at it from being on the tip of the spear. And my job was to look at my indigenous kind of, compadre, who, by the way, it's impossible for me not to fall in love with. I'm sorry. I'm living with them. It's the same thing with, with the CTPTs in Afghanistan.
Right.
In my base in Afghanistan, we lived with them, we ate with them. Such different experiences when the regular U.S. military, everyone was armed together. There was never a green on blue ever. And in fact, they saved our lives constantly. I'm not here today.
Right.
There's 10 Americans or 20 Americans at 1,000 Indige.
Right.
And so, you have an affinity for them. And, these are your brothers in arms or sisters in arms. And so ultimately, I think that where I get upset about the Ukraine issue is that we just didn't do enough.
Yeah.
And I would have hated to be on the front lines, or not in the front lines, but in the trenches somewhere with Ukrainian partners, and trying to explain why we didn't give ATACMS, why F-16s are late, and for God's sakes, political dysfunction in the U.S. I mean, again, look at that declassified intel report. I mean, we have attrited 87% of the Russian military. That's an adversary of ours. This is a wild success. Like, okay, why are we not doing more of this? I just, it's and one other last piece too. I know I talked about it last time I came on about Ukraine, and this is being very simplistic, but it is I think one of the reasons why Ukraine has been appealing to members of the intelligence and special operations, the military communities, is that it is much more of a good versus evil story. Iraq was very fuzzy.
Yeah.
I mean, for fuck's sake, we have put in place a sort of an Iranian surrogate.
Right.
Iraq.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Could you say that Iraq was a win for the U.S.? I'm not sure.
No.
Right?
No.
Ukraine is a little more clear cut.
Yeah.
In my view. And I think there's that, I'm sorry, I'm just a middle-class kid from New Jersey, but that's the appeal that I have. Right? That stuff tugs at me.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Russia invaded, and we're helping a country remain free from invasion.
That's it. It's kind of good. I mean, I like that.
We knew by all the protests against Russia that they invaded.
Right. Everywhere. Amazing.
Yeah.
All over campuses. I can't, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to go down to DC.
Yeah.
Or in London or everywhere else. I mean, no. Didn't see that.
Was there anything else? Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Even if it's not about these two topics, anything else going on for you that you?
One of the coolest things that I will, this is a positive note. Because I mentioned before that I go around kind of talking to college students all over the country. I don't get paid anything for this. Like, they'll pay my expenses, so I'm not making any money. But I love going and talking to college students who are interested in national security. So these are either ROTC programs or intelligence study programs, national security programs, anything like that. And it's the idea of passing the torch to the next generation. And to me, that's so important. And aside from my kind of being horrified at some of Generation Z who are protesting out in the streets, but in general, I think we're okay. And the individuals who are interested in national security, are patriotic. They want to serve. And as I go and talk to schools all over the country, and it's across the board everywhere. It's really exciting because I think that the most important thing is that as we all kind of get gray in the tooth or lose our hair. Sorry, you and I are in the same spot. We got to go back to the first episode I came on. I definitely had more fucking hair. There's no doubt about that. But ultimately, we're passing the torch to the next generation, and that's a good thing. And I don't believe everything the agency tells me when I ask them about kind of recruitment and retention. I think there's an issue on retention. But I think on recruitment, I think they're doing pretty well. And so there are people who want to come into the national security community. They want to serve. And it's not the post 9/11 surge where everyone wanted to go kind of kick ass, but it's the idea of, what does an intelligence officer mean? Well, it's an intellectual exercise too. I always say, you got to go and be interested. Dave, you talked about, in your military, your career, learning Arabic. And so you got to learn different languages. And what does that mean? Well, you got to learn about different cultures. You got to learn about religion. You got to learn about Islam if you want to go in the Arabic world. It's funny people and funny food and immersing yourself in a culture and becoming that expert. And, I tell these students a story, which is really, I've done a lot of things in my career, and you and I have talked so much about this. I've had some great moments. I've had some awful moments. My record is mixed, and I'm very humble. But one of the cool things that happened, and I'm gonna name a U.S. politician, and half the audience, maybe more of it here, will go crazy, but it doesn't matter because she was Speaker of the House. So Nancy Pelosi came out to Damascus when I was there, and she went to the chargé d'affaires. There was no ambassadors, the number 2, but she said, "I want to talk to the smartest person on Syria in the embassy," and he said, "Go talk to Marc." And I was flattered, first of all, that a senior State Department person said this, but that's because I spoke Arabic. I knew the town cold. I knew everything. I knew everybody in the town. There's nothing in that place and I spent 4 hours talking to her just about internal Syrian dynamics and politics. That is what you want to do as an intelligence officer. This goes back to the old days of Lawrence of Arabia,
right?
Or the book I read I love James Michener books. There's a book he wrote, Caravans, about a young foreign service officer in Afghanistan. That to me is so inspiring. I want to be that substantive expert. I remember there was an ABC News journalist, also Anthony Cordesman. I don't know if you remember that name. He worked for ABC for a long time. He came to Damascus and he went to he told me he went to the Syrian palace and he said, who's the smartest person at the embassy? And they said, the CIA guy, Marc. Now that's not good. I was like, well, fuck, my cover's fucked up right now. But that's what you want.
To be that to be that expert.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's what I tell these college students is that you immerse yourself. Like, hey, if you don't want to do kind of funny food, religion, people, ethnic stuff, go join the FBI. God bless. Mm-hmm. Love my bureau colleagues. Work in America. Go to, Des Moines, which I actually might be going to. So I got to go do a speech in Des Moines. I've never been to Des Moines. I'm actually excited about it. I love, we've been all over the fucking world and I haven't seen half of America. So I'm excited to see mid-America. But ultimately, that's what you want to be. You want to be that person who has that incredible kind of, cultural and linguistic and historical knowledge. And And when I tell this to college students, they really respond to that. And so I do have faith that we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Not always, but just kind of inherently when I go and talk to these folks, and then particularly when I go talk to ROTC programs. I was not in the military. Just I got to kind of throw that out. But I go talk to the service academies. I've been going to the Citadel quite a bit to talk to them. I'm going to go to VMI for their kind of leadership program, and so I think we're going to be all right. And that to me is something that matters. If we can pass the torch to the next generation, no one gives a shit, Dave, what you and I did in our past.
No.
I mean, I don't know. You might have this. We got to have you guys come to Northern Virginia team house trip.
True. Not true.
I'll come to the. You can come to my basement. Everyone has their "I love me" wall. Everyone fucking has it. I'm sorry. You have it.
Yeah.
And it's all the hero shit that I've done, but none of that matters. No one gives a shit except me and my kids.
Yeah.
What matters is passing the torch.
Yeah. No,
That's
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, D, what were you saying?
I said, no, people will remember what you got, are interested in what you guys did.
I don't think so. Like,
yeah, you got.
even
my
girlfriend gets like
humble,
sleepy-eyed when I start telling her stuff. I'm like,
I don't know.
We should do
a lot of stories.
We should do a team house at the Vienna Inn. That's what we should do, a team house.
That's you got to come to the greatest dive bar on the planet, where actually I spend way too much time.
We're down. A special show.
Chili cheese dogs. The Vienna is cool. They actually. So I'll tell you 3 stories from the Vienna Inn. One is there's a hat I wore in Afghanistan for a year in Shkin that's in a glass case right by the men's room there. I think that's pretty cool. I came back and it was a Vienna Inn hat. It's dirty and nasty and smells, but we put it in a glass case, and Marty, the owner, put it up there. Number 2 is they sell my book there. I wrote a book on leadership, and so I sign copies, and people come in and buy it, which I still find shocking. But the last point, and I haven't told you guys this, so I was the technical consultant on Equalizer 3, the Denzel movie.
Oh, how was that for you, man?
It was fun. But here's the great Vienna Inn story. So, as I'm going through and I'm kind of reviewing the script, and if you go back and you see the movie, there's so much kind of CIA nomenclature in there. So it's Denzel's script and Dakota Fanning and all the things they say. It really is kind of, this story is not a CIA story, but everything they say about the agency kind of rings true. Whether it's, I think Dakota Fanning works at CTC Fino, Financial Operations Group. That's a real group. There's a team that's coming in and doing something, and it was PAG, the Physical Access Group. I mean, none of this is classified, so or if it is, I'm in trouble. But the best part about it is there's a character in there who plays the chief of station in Rome in the movie, and they made it exactly looking like kind of me, like the little goatee, all the time wearing jeans and kind of an untucked button-down shirt, which is all I wore ever anywhere, including at headquarters. But I remember I went to the Vienna Inn one day, and I'm like, hey, I got to get a hat out to the set out in Italy, and so we FedExed a Vienna Inn baseball hat. And in the movie, the chief of station in Rome is wearing this Vienna Inn baseball hat for 5 different scenes.
That's awesome.
And so it was awesome. And so there's a picture. There's kind of a picture up. There's a spread at the Vienna Inn about it. They're really excited about it. But what happened is, so I went in there the other day, and they're like, we've had to order. Like, we're getting calls from all over the world for these baseball hats, the Vienna Inn hat. And so they've had to make multiple orders over and over and over again, because it's now this kind of cult following, because like the Vienna Inn. So it's an old CIA hangout too. So, I go in there every once in a while. I'm always saying, like, shouldn't you guys give me like free chicken wings and
right,
Philly cheese dogs? Yeah. Occasionally they do, but not enough.
Well, I mean, either that or some of those sweet hat profits.
Totally. But it's a great place. And so, the Vienna Inn is like this. We sit around and just fuck around and bullshit and drink beer, and that's why that place is. It is. I think if that place closes, I'm moving.
Yeah,
that's it.
So Marc's book is Clarity in Crisis. You can get it on from any of your booksellers. It's down in links. It's down in the description. And we've talked about the book on a previous show. And Marc's been on, like, I think 5 times now, maybe 6. I'm not sure, but go back and check out everything from talk about the Vanna syndrome,
right,
to every show's been great.
It's been fun, but people always come up to me and talk to me. They remember these shows.
Oh, that's great.
So you guys have a cult following. It's good.
I guess we get around in the intel community every now and again.
You do.
Yeah.
100%. Oh yeah, this is fun.
Maybe I shouldn't have showed my ass earlier.
By the way, you started off the show.
Yeah.
That was good. I don't know if people turned it on, and like all of a sudden it went viral, or people like, oh, they got to turn it off.
You know,
you guys have your metrics on this. You'll see how many people end up viewing this thing,
I got some jelly in my roll. What can I say?
I think it's a net positive. Showing
it's a net
ass.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think so.
Where
what
else
D
can
says goes. Let's go.
Exactly.
By the way, I just want to say to all the listeners, this is obviously there's a great following for the show, but you all are quality humans, and I will say that when I last time I was in New York, we all went out to lunch at a Greek restaurant. I think chosen by D, right?
Yep.
Downtown, and it was awesome. It was just great seeing you guys. It's so much fun kind of hanging out, and basically I think when we sat around for lunch for 2 hours, we did this.
Yeah.
It just wasn't taped.
Yeah. Just sat around, shot the shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where else can people find you, Marc?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm on Twitter at mpolymer. It is unfiltered, and one of my friends from the Intel community who's also in the media. I won't say his name, but he goes, you are like the dart with no feathers. You don't give a shit what you say, which probably hurts me sometimes. But so I'm on Twitter, and certainly I'm on MSNBC as the national security contributor. I'm on probably a couple times a week, and I have a kind of unique place there, in that my job is to comment on the intelligence world and the national security world, and so I've had some fun doing that. But it's and then the last piece too is that one of the things I do, if anyone here is in the corporate world or the sports world, I do a lot of leadership talks around the country. I've done tons of it for sports teams. I mean, I was Vanderbilt University baseball. Any baseball fans or college baseball, they reached out to talk to me, and I was thrilled. But I've gone around the country talking a lot about leadership in the athletics world, and then obviously corporate stuff, which makes me some money, which can be fun too. One of the cool things about the book is, the principles, and we've already done our book episode. But I've had some wild groups kind of come to me to do leadership talks that you would not even imagine, and so it's been a lot of fun too. D, I got to tell you, can I tell you a story? One last thing for D.
Yeah. There's no rush.
I went out to Chicago in October, and I did the leadership convention for the Greek Orthodox Church of America.
Oh God, Jesus
350, 80 Greek priests, 350 members, and they wanted to hear about leadership, and it was incredibly fun. It was wild.
Was the FBI surveilling?
No, but it was pretty cool. So the Greek, and so my father calls me and said, "When's the last time you were at church?" I was like, "Never." He's like, "You're a fraud." So I had to call them up and say, "Look, hey, I'm not very religious on this." They didn't care, and it was actually really fun. And the Greek church has the same problems as any company or corporation as anywhere else in terms of, micromanagement or not being on the same page,
embezzlement.
God, I'm not going to say that. But ultimately, I've done some really fun stuff with this, and so that was a wild one out in Chicago, Illinois. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch of North America came to see me. What the hell? It was great. I think he probably condemned me. But so here's a really interesting point on that. Sorry, this is great because we can kind of do freeform stuff. Is I told a story about having some regret about some of the things I've done in war zones, and they were really upset about that. I guess, religiously, they said, you can't feel like you have to forgive. I had to do with forgiveness. I said, I haven't forgiven myself for some of the things that I've done. Yeah. And they said, you have to they were really serious about that. And they took me aside and they were like, we need to talk to you about this. And I said, and forgiveness is something that's really, it's got to be kind of your personal journey. And I said, well, I don't. I really screwed up and some people got hurt. And they said, well, this is something for you to work on. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. And it's also interesting. I think, it's always easier to look at somebody else and forgive them, especially if you understand, than it is to forgive yourself. Like you were talking about the 3 Israeli hostages killed,
right.
In that thing. And it's like anybody who's been sort of in that situation and fog of war, and especially if you have maneuver elements or you have people
right.
with suicide bombs that you can't really identify that can clack off when they get within 5 feet of you or whatever.
Right.
it's a terribly tragic thing. And the people who did that, you know, I don't know what unit it was, but they probably were not a premier counterterrorist
Oh, it
unit.
definitely was not. It was not a
You know what I mean? They're probably regular soldiers who are not trained.
No, I would say they were probably reservists.
Yeah, who were not trained to
Right.
that level, and they were
Right.
put in a stressful situation and made a bad shoot. They're the hostages' families. I would imagine will probably forgive them long before they forgive themselves.
I will say that this is going to get a little too personal. That some of the things that I've done that have gone wrong, that there are people who have said to me, "I forgive you for that."
Yeah.
But I don't forgive myself.
Yeah.
So you know that's a really good point.
Yeah.
On that, and I don't know my wife. You know, so I'm Greek, but you know my wife's Catholic, and our kids were raised Catholic. She's always trying to get me to get a little more deep and religious. I'm not there yet, but I don't know. We'll see. But you know, on a serious note, I've told you before about kind of some of my health struggles and stuff like that in the past. But the one individual who's the most helpful for me in terms of kind of mental health care at Walter Reed was a Marine Corps chaplain, you know, Chappie, and he told me about forgiveness. And so it was definitely like, you know, because I was really pissed at the agency for screwing me on healthcare.
Yeah.
And certain individuals, and he's like, "You got to forgive them." And I said, "I can't." He goes, you got to drop it. Like the anger and the hate, it's not good for you. And so in that sense, that idea of forgiveness, for you know, me looking outward at someone
Right.
else, I can do that. Me looking at myself for some of the mistakes I made, you know, that's a different story. And I will say that Walter Reed also said that as I was there with you know, myself and a couple of members of you know, Naval Special Warfare and then Air Force Special Operations Command. They basically said, you know, we could probably spend a year with you all. So on mental health counseling, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyhow, no shame in that at all. That's something that I certainly needed and still do.
Yeah. No, it's important, and it's you know, it's an important facet that, you know, we've talked with you about it. We try to talk with other veterans and intelligence professionals about it if they've gone through that journey, because it's something that needs to be normalized.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't help when medical records are getting turned over to cops. Like, it makes people like, you know, like this big thing that's like it definitely, like, it makes it harder for veterans to trust that they can speak in confidence with anybody without all of a sudden getting red flagged or whatever else.
Right.
But
that's the, you know, so it can't be a stigma. It cannot.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah.
All right. Last thing I want to say. I'm going to ask you guys, what's your favorite show on TV right now?
I'm watching Fargo right now.
You said Fargo?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Right.
That's what I'm watching.
Right. Dave?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, Severance was fantastic. Waiting for the next season of that. And then Mythic Quest. I don't know. There's so much. There's a lot of good stuff. Andor was phenomenal.
I'm going to throw out Bosch Legacy.
Bosch Legacy?
Bosch Legacy.
Oh, Bosch Legacy. From the old Bosch.
Bosch, the police series, the cop. And so Bosch Legacy is when his daughter becomes a cop too, and he becomes a private investigator. It's awesome.
Is it? Where can people find that?
Amazon
yeah,
Prime.
I think Bosch was on Amazon. I'm pretty sure the second one.
It's Amazon Prime. It's interesting because, you know, I do a lot of leadership. One last piece, a lot of leadership consulting with the Philadelphia Police Department. So I'm shuttling back and forth to Philly a lot because, you know, the cops, especially cops on the street, certainly need that, and so I've kind of become fascinated with the policing profession. And so Bosch Legacy was pretty cool. But my wife thinks I'm crazy because I come back and I was like, yeah, I'm going on these ride-alongs at night with the Philly cops and having a blast, and it's an adrenaline rush. And she's like, come on, man, you're 55 years old. What are you doing?
Yeah, like.
And I took my son there. My son's in college, so I took a picture of him. He's wearing his vest, and he's going out in the streets with the Philly cops. And she's like, you're crazy. And of course, now he's totally into this.
Marc, I got a question.
We got a question. Did you check Patreon, or do you want me to?
Can you do it?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Marc a question right now, too.
Okay.
So let's say, you know, you were the deputy chief of ops, right, in Eurasia and Europe when you retired. cut, and you were what? You were young, relatively young. You were like in your 50. I mean, if you didn't retire and let's say like you didn't get hit with the microwave weapon and all that went down, you're probably in line for like deputy director, no? You got to be on a short list, no?
That's all based on luck. I have no idea. I mean, I think that, ultimately, well, there's a couple things on that. That's total luck. I have no idea. I would never be so presumptuous to think I'd be chosen for that. But let me also say, like, the second you get promoted up to those ranks, your life is miserable. You don't run operations anymore. It's all about people and resources and problems. I hated the job. I really did. My time as a street case officer was so far in my past. So I don't know. I don't think I was terribly ambitious to do those things. But what was interesting is, you get promoted to senior intelligence service. It's a big deal.
Right.
That's the similar to be a 1-star. And then I retired as an SIS-4, so that's the equivalent of a 3 or 4-star. But it doesn't mean anything. And ultimately, it was just kind of a lot of headaches. And I remember when I got promoted to SIS, one of my friends said, well, we're in the same class. And they said, now we're going to get the secrets to the kingdom, the keys to the kingdom. And there was nothing there. It's 1,000 personnel problems, resource problems. And, if someone comes to me with an operational decision, something's gone really wrong because there's about 1 billion people under me who should make those decisions. Now, sometimes that happens. But you want to, the leadership kind of model you should follow is like, knowing I should not be making these decisions at all. Brief me on what happened after the fact, for God's sakes, but not coming up there. So I don't know. There's no glory in senior leadership. Sorry, nice fancy title, but that's about it. I mean, I'm being hypocritical because I certainly would use this as in my public persona now, but. My favorite times was as a street case officer as a GS 11 or 12, on the streets of the third world somewhere. That was really fun. I had nothing else except me and the agent I'm handling, and a hostile counterintelligence service and, foreign intelligence information to gather. That stuff was really fun. No other responsibilities. I want to be a kid again. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, in about 30 years we will be, so...
That's right.
From Patreon, from Ian, please let Marc that we're concerned for his health and hope he is well.
That's very nice. That's very good. People have been so nice about kind of my health journey. And so, I talked to Walter Reed the other day, and, I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. Obviously, and it was based on some events that happened in Moscow in 2017. But when I talked to the docs at Walter Reed, and this is the leading TBI center on the planet, and I said, it's 6 years later, I'm finally feeling better, and they said, yeah, TBI takes about 5 or 6 years, and I was like, you didn't fucking tell me that, and they said we can't.
Yeah.
So if we tell you that, and this is really serious, like people might, if you say you have a 5-year recovery, there's going to be some bad stuff that happens with people who are really suffering, and so I'm like, I'm really feeling better. Thank you for all you did, and they said, well. That's this is the kind of the timeline, the trajectory, and so I was both happy that I'm on the right path, but also I was like, holy crap! I mean, if you had told me, in 2018 or 2019 especially, or 18, when I was really struggling, that's when you have some serious kind of that's a danger zone right there. If you say, hey, don't worry about it, 3 years you'll feel better.
Right.
My head's gonna fucking explode every day.
Right.
And whatever happened to me. Doesn't matter as much as the notion that it was a TBI. And so like everything I experienced, all the symptoms, and when I ultimately got a settlement from the agency, it was because Walter Reed, did the following. They said, yes, Marc had a traumatic brain injury, line of duty, imaging shows it, not a pre-existing condition. This is what happened. I mean, they were so meticulous in documenting this. And so, but I got a lot of love for that place. I must say those people saved my life, no doubt.
Yeah. Isaac, I've seen some of the footage from the Festival Massacre, and I'm aware of the terrible things that Hamas has done, but how is it even possible for all of that awfulness to be getting lost in all the noise?
Right. And so, that's the problem. That's the age that we're in where, footage like that is talked about, comes out a little bit, but then people refute it, say it didn't happen.
Right.
Social media has been, social media is a great avenue to kind of disseminate, things to the masses in the world, but it's also so rife with disinformation. And you have, hundreds, thousands of people who actually don't believe that 10/7 happened, or,
Right.
or actually say, Hamas did not perpetrate those atrocities. And
Right.
and you can have this notion, and I'm not saying positive or negative, kind of the Elon Musk view of this is the kind of what does he call it, the
Like the public square,
the public
platform.
the public square, that's right,
Yeah.
the public square. But the problem is there's no filter,
Right.
and of course, what can be a filter? Who says what's right or what's wrong? But ultimately, it is. I think the idea of pushing this out, that kind of information out, is a good thing. Obviously, the families may object to this, but yeah. So the disinformation. So I mean, this is a whole other show on this, and how does disinformation kind of play into everything we do? But some people I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to, if you'd ever show that footage of 10/7 to someone who's a Hamas sympathizer, they won't believe it.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, just you're lost.
They'll say it's all like deep fake or AI generated.
I mean, I don't know. Right?
And the thing is that what the counter agents do is they do create the deep fakes, they put them out there, and then they debunk them, and then they say, see, the whole thing was fake, so that people discard everything that goes along with it. Yeah, it's crazy.
So one of the things that was really interesting in my last job, we talked about Russian disinformation and information operations, and so how the Russians would put, and so the way to battle this, and this is not, I'm not picking on Russia now, but the truth is always the right thing to do. And so if you can, it's not, you can't battle propaganda with propaganda. What you have to do is if you see something is a deep fake, or it's kind of a Russian disinformation operation, or if it's the Chinese are endemic in this. The Chinese are kicking our butt at stuff like this. If we can kind of catch that in time and counter it with the truth. And I remember when we would kind of brief members of Congress on our efforts on this, and they would say, well, we can't make up stuff about our adversary. We're like, we're not. If we tell the truth, if we expose what the other side is doing, that's going to be really effective. And so, but I, when it comes to that kind of the Hamas, Israel Hamas stuff, I mean, Israel is losing the information war, which is unfortunate.
M. Corbin, thank you very much. I wonder if the response we saw from the U.S. public was partly from the algorithmic content grooming. An example of this is presenting content that is likely to be negative to keep the user engagement going.
I don't even know what that means.
Just like creating negative comment or content, because the algorithm promotes posts and content that has a lot of engagement.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So if you create negative posts or
right, sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
No, that actually makes a lot of sense. I think I'm not smart enough on this, in terms of the algorithms of some of these, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or things like that. But it's clear, and so I apologize because the person who wrote that in, it actually makes a lot of sense. So one of the things you look at is the algorithms or that I've heard people talk about, the algorithms for TikTok, and so it's so kind of wildly biased, kind of in a certain way. I mean, it was, God, I don't know what entity put out that that it was kind of this kind of pro Hamas, pro Palestinian content. It was like 87% of the algorithm. It was something like that. So, but again, this is how do you regulate social media platforms? I don't know. This is getting into areas where there's issues of free speech, and it's super complicated. And the weird thing is that there's all sorts of different political kind of this is across the political divide, or you have weird bedfellows on this with kind of the hard left and the hard right sometimes agreeing on this. I don't know. Tough one.
Do you for the people that in Israel? Is Israel right now looking at these, because we're seeing this a lot out of Ivy Leagues, right? We're seeing a lot of these protests out of Ivy Leagues, and Ivy Leagues lead to a lot of times government positions to, they had that pipeline. Does Israel see sort of this current trend in America colleges as a threat to their future in 50 years or 20 years?
I think that it's just been a lot of surprise at some of these elite universities. I mean, one of the things that, everyone wants their kids to go to kind of the best schools. All of a sudden, some of these best schools are not a place where kind of, American Jews can feel comfortable. I think that's, my friends, kind of in the Jewish community who are sending their kids to the Ivy Leagues are horrified. But that's where you want to send your kids in terms of kind of making it in America. But I think that, again, when I talked to the Israeli embassy officials the other day, I said to them, take this video to the Ivy League campuses. And they said, we're thinking about it. And I said, that's the right thing to do. Again, understanding the sensitivities of the families. But, you got to, and I wouldn't blame it only on the Ivy Leagues. I think it's endemic all over college campuses. Maybe not the SEC. I don't know. Maybe not down south. But again, a buddy of mine was at the Alabama game, and there was, students running around with kind of free Palestine flags down at, and so, but I think that it's just a matter of kind of pushing this message out. And look, what's the old? I'm going to get this totally wrong. It's the Uzo talking. The old statement by Churchill: if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative when you're old, you have no brain. Like, college kids, like young people, can be stupid. That's okay. Like, youngsters are going to be dumb. I was. But ultimately, I think that, we do have to kind of put the truth out as best as possible. And there is a lot to be said for that testimony of the university presidents the other day from MIT, from Penn, and from Harvard, because I think that is indicative of kind of some of the things that have gone wrong in American academia. When I went to college, truth be told, I got to admit it here, I get vilified by everyone. I went to Cornell, so it's an Ivy League school, but I had professors who were very conservative and I had professors who were liberal, and there really was more of a notion of free speech. And my friends there from Cornell, some of them who are listening here, my Jewish friends, who some of their kids actually go to Cornell, are horrified at what's happened. And they can't believe it. And, I think, there's certainly people who want to pull their, donations or fundraising for the schools. But that's not the right answer. It's more of, what is so I actually blame this, Dave, on the professors. I don't know what's happened. When colleges hire professors, they got to hire both from the left and the right. Yeah, they really do. Yeah, I love that. I had an extremely conservative professor at Cornell, Jeremy Rapkin. Famous kind of strict constitutionalist. I loved his class. I didn't agree with a lot of the stuff. Yeah. But you got to learn both sides. I want to read Karl Marx and I want to read Ayn Rand. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about it. But but I think that American academia somehow has drifted so far to the left. And I'm a centrist, so I'm not. I come at this from a kind of a very moderate angle. But I think that when it comes down to it, it's professors are going to influence the students. Simple as that.
Sorry, our church upstairs seems to be going out of pattern and starting up on a Friday night. So if you hear that, I apologize.
Yeah, I've already sent them a text pitching them out already.
I just want to say, Ohms.
What are they doing?
Bro, they fucking rock, dude. It's like they play on their drums. They have their speakers on the floor and they do chants.
It's like,
and I want to kill myself.
It's like shaking. It's like being in a club.
It's a church?
Yeah.
It's an Ethiopian evangelical church.
Love it. Maybe they're doing weird shit.
No,
up there.
I hate it. They should go do it somewhere else. They should go
they're not supposed to do this on Friday nights.
But not right above us. These fuckers.
Holmes, thank you very much for the donation. We appreciate it. M. Corbin, thank you very much. You good. And Marc, that's it, man. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
That was great. I love coming on. You guys are awesome. I hope the listeners enjoyed kind of a grand tour of the Middle East and Russia and our usual kind of banter. But love coming on here and give Jack shit. He's still avoiding me. Yeah. He is avoiding me. I am now officially suspicious.
Again, like I said, he's playing hard to get you to our Christmas party.
Right. I'll be in the Bahamas. I'm out of here.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Marc. See you.